Chapter 111. Yu didn't have the ability to deal with the other princes, but he could target Yu Miaoqi. After thinking it over, she decided to take drastic measures and marry off Yu Miaoqi, this scourge, as soon as possible. Based on her current hatred for family Yu, the higher she climbed, the crueler her methods of revenge would be in the future. Yu definitely wouldn't give her a chance to turn things around. There were still a few days until the new year, but the servants had already taken out red silk to decorate the courtyard. The lanterns in the corridor had all been replaced with new ones. From afar it looked like a festive scene. The matriarch ordered Mama Ma to buy a lot of red paper, and called all of her grandchildren to the main hall to write couplets and draw the characters of fortune. Yu Xiang's palms were raw from practicing walking, so he could only sit to the side and watch. However, she wasn't willing to stop. She stretched out her index and middle fingers and moved them around her brother's shoulders as if she was walking. This made his heart itch unbearably. He dripped several blobs of ink on the red paper and ruined a few couplets. When she received her brother's warning gaze, she covered her mouth and chuckled. She picked up a malt candy and bit it between her teeth. She even used her tongue to play with the candy and swayed it up and down. Her bright little eyes burned directly at her brother's lips. Yu Pinyan's lower abdomen seemed to have a ball of fire burning. His already dark eyes darkened. He wanted nothing more than to catch the little minx and swallow the candy and her naughty little tongue into his stomach. "Aya, big brother, you dirted another couplet. Have you been too tired recently? You can't even hold a pen properly." You pulled over the Spring Festival couplet that was stained with ink. Her expression was full of regret. "I've been a bit tired recently." Yu Pinyan rubbed between his brows. Yu Xiang bit off the candy with a crunch and giggled. After laughing, she stretched the remaining half of the candy to her brother's mouth and coaxed. "Here, if you're tired, eat a candy to replenish your energy. It's very sweet." Yu Pinyan looked at her deeply, then rolled the candy into his mouth and crushed it. His burning gaze never left his sister. Yu Miaoqi was also in a good mood. While writing couplets, she hummed a song. Not only did she attract the attention of Yu Xiang and the others, but even the old madam also looked at her several times. "Grandmother, after I finish writing the couplets, I will send some to mother. After all, it's going to be the new year soon. She's going to be lonely in the Lin residence." She picked up the couplet she was most satisfied with and smiled like a flower. Without waiting for the old lady to nod, Yu Xiang spoke first. "Yu Miaoqi, why are you so happy today? Have you found your in-laws?" After saying that, he turned to look at the old lady and asked seriously, "Old ancestor, which family is it?" Yu Miaoqi was 15 years old this year. It was time for him to get engaged. Otherwise it would be too late. "Oh right, there's still big sister." The old lady was indeed considering the marriage of her two granddaughters. When she heard this, she gave Mama Ma a look. Mama Ma immediately took out 2 name cards. "Xiang'er's injured leg hasn't recovered yet. Let's not talk about the engagement for now. See if you are satisfied with this person. If you are satisfied, old ancestor will help you talk about marriage." The old lady handed over one of the name cards. You took it and looked at it. The other party was a military general. He was 22 years old at the time. Because he was stationed at the border and didn't return for many years, his marriage was delayed. This year, he was transferred back to the capital and promoted to a 4th-rank commander. It could be said that he had a bright future. Moreover, his parents were dead. He only had an older brother who had separated from the family. He didn't have any concubines or tongfang by his side. He was very clean. You held the name card with a surprised expression. She never thought that she would be able to find such a good husband. It really was like a dream. "Don't be happy yet." Because he went to war, there was an inch-long scar on his forehead, which damaged his appearance. "I will take you to see it another day. If you don't think it's good, I won't force you." The old lady knew that her granddaughter had always admired handsome men. She was afraid that this person wouldn't enter her eyes. However, this was already the best candidate she could find. Unexpectedly, you waved her hand and smiled. "I won't see it. It's him. So what if she's good-looking? What matters when we live together is character and virtue." The old lady was gratified and sighed. Good. Siyu has really improved." Yu Miaoqi stared at the other name card in the old lady's hand. She was sitting on pins and needles. The old lady sensed her uneasiness and handed the name card over. Her tone was solemn. This is the husband I chose for you. Last month I sent someone to talk about marriage. His family also agreed. They will pick an auspicious day for you to marry. What? It's already decided? How come I didn't know? Yumiauchi questioned in a shrill voice. She took the name card and looked at it. Her expression was as ferocious as a ghost. A small magistrate. His family lives in Wang City's Li County. A 30-year-old widower. He married 4 wives and all of them died. Grandmother, you actually want me to marry such a person? You can't wait for me to die. She crumpled the name card and cried. Shut up. If I didn't have a choice, do you think I would marry the daughter of the first wife of the Marquis family to such a person? Why don't you take a look at your own fate? The old lady waved at Mama Ma. Take out her birth characters and let her see it for herself. Mama Ma agreed and took out a name card and placed it in front of Yumiauchi's eyes. If you don't believe me, take the birth characters and find someone to check. You have the fate of being a star of calamity. You jinx your 6 relatives. On the day you were born, you jinxed your father to death. Then you jinxed the family Shen. The Shen couple died in vain and you almost destroyed your eldest brother's career. If I don't find you a husband with the same fate, you will be a living widow for the rest of your life. There will be no one to take care of you when you grow old and no one to send you off. You will end up in a miserable state. I don't believe it. You must be lying to me. I am a noble person. I was born noble and blessed. My family Shen parents told me that since I was young. These birth characters must be fake. Yumiauchi grabbed the name card and ran away. Yu Xiang was stunned. She forgot to bite the candy in her mouth and blankly said, Old ancestor, Yumiauchi really has the fate of being a star of calamity? In her previous life she believed in Buddhism. After she died, she came to the great Han dynasty. She naturally believed in fate without a doubt. However, Yumiauchi was different from others. She was the female lead and would become the empress in the future. She should have great luck, so how did she suddenly become a star of calamity? Could it be that the power of her butterfly wings was really that great? However, no matter what, Yumiauchi was going to be married off. Moreover, she was going to marry a 6th-ranked magistrate. Presumably, she wouldn't be able to make any big waves. Her heartstrings loosened, and she began to chew on the candy bar. You also looked straight at the old lady, her eyes full of curiosity. These words were personally said by Master Kuhai. It can't be wrong. If it wasn't for this, how could I let her marry into such a family? It's said that high families marry their wives and low families marry their daughters. No matter how low our Marquis family marries their daughters, it won't be to this extent. The old lady sighed helplessly. Yu Pinyan's expression was indifferent. In any case, it's good that she can be married off. She harbors resentment towards the family Yu. If we keep her, she'll be a disaster sooner or later. Thinking of the fate of the family Shen, the old lady nodded her head sadly. Yumiauchi ordered the carriage to be prepared. She held the name card in her hand as she arrived at the Lin residence. After dismissing the servants, she hurriedly asked, Mother, look at this birth character. Lin Clan picked up the birth character and looked at it carefully. He said, Isn't this Yu Xiang's birth character? Yumiauchi let out a long sigh, but the next moment, Lin Clan sighed again. Look at my memory. You two were swapped. Your horoscope should be Yu Xiang's, and Yu Xiang's horoscope should be yours. This is your horoscope. Back then I had someone calculate it. The words that followed gradually died down, and the faces of the members of the Lin clan turned pale with fright. You found someone to read your fortune. What about it? Yumiauchi's heart that had just been put down was once again raised high. It's been so long I've long forgotten about it. I vaguely remember it's just words like unparalleled riches and honor. My daughter is naturally blessed. The Lin clan's smile was rather forced, and his eyes flickered with uncertainty. After receiving her daughter, she was so happy that she was dizzy with joy. She didn't even realize that Yu Xiang's fate should have belonged to her daughter. The so-called heavenly calamity star was referring to her daughter. Her husband died because of her daughter, not because of Yu Xiang. This knowledge kept hitting her already fragile mental defenses, causing her to lose control of her mind. How could Yu Miaoqi not see her abnormality? She grabbed her wrist and sternly questioned, "You're lying, aren't you? What did that fortune teller say? Is my fate really that of a heavenly calamity star as the matriarch said? That's impossible." The Lin clan suppressed the palpitations in his heart and comforted her. "Don't let your imagination run wild. You're the legitimate daughter of the Marquis family. You were born to enjoy wealth and honor. How could you be that kind of person with a bitter life? That fortune teller is a liar, a fraud. Let's find another expert to read it. Let's go, we'll go to the Zhengguo temple to find Master Kuhai." As soon as he finished speaking, he pulled his daughter onto the carriage. Yu Miaoqi's heart surged with infinite hope, and he ordered the coachman to speed up to the Zhengguo temple. Under the guise of Yu Xiang, the two of them went to the meditation room where Kuhai cultivated and handed over the birth certificate. This poor monk has seen this birth certificate before. Kuhai gave it a cursory glance and immediately said, "Great master, where have you seen it before? What kind of fate is this?" The Lin clan licked his dry lips, his heart thumping wildly. 5 years ago, matriarch, you came to inquire with this birth certificate. Kuhai turned to look at Yu Miaoqi. He put his palms together and said with compassion, "Ba. This poor monk has a word of advice for this benefactor. As the saying goes, endure hardships and defend hard work, and prosper. Although it's superficial, it's true, but the noble heart is not easy to change. Keep moving forward, even life and death can't affect you. Benefactor's fate may be bitter, but you can eliminate it with kindness and virtue. Sooner or later, there will be a day when you will leave Kuhai." The Lin clan was completely paralyzed on the praying mat. He covered his face and wept. Since this birth certificate was asked by Master Kuhai, it couldn't be wrong. His own daughter was actually the star of death. He had repeatedly scolded for more than 10 years. How laughable, how sad. Yu Miaoqi was stunned for a few breaths before coming back to her senses. She said calmly, "Then great master, can you help me look at the other birth certificate?" Then she reported her own birth certificate, which originally belonged to Yu Xiang. Kuhai closed his eyes and calculated. After a moment he smiled and said, "This birth certificate is really wonderful. It's actually in the Tianfu Xingzhen Palace at the right time. Although there were many misfortunes in the early years, after the age of 16, one's good fortune will continue and become rich and noble." Yu Miaoqi couldn't listen anymore. She got up and left, slamming the door. The Lin clan hurriedly apologized to Kuhai. The two returned to the carriage and didn't speak for a long time. Seeing that the Zhengguo temple was getting farther and farther away, the Lin clan said faintly, "Son, when the fourth prince asks for your hand in marriage in the future, they will have to exchange birth certificates. I'm afraid your fate is." Chapter 112. After returning from the Lin residence, Yu Miaoqi locked herself in her room and refused to see anyone. She only came to the main hall on the night of the New Year's Eve dinner. When the old madam saw her, she only greeted her indifferently, as if she didn't see her haggard complexion. After the New Year's Eve dinner, they played cards for a while. Seeing that the sky was dark and the sound of firecrackers could be heard everywhere in the city, the old madam waved her hand and said, "Let's go out and drive away the Nian beasts." The so-called driving away the Nian beasts was like setting off firecrackers. Other households naturally had servants do it for them, but at the Marquis household, Yu Pinyin did it personally. She ordered people to bring a large box of cannons and lit them one by one and threw them into the sky. Although Yu Xiang's leg was broken, she was spoiled by Yu Pinyin and became even more unrestrained. She held an incense stick in her left hand and a 2-finger-thick cannon in her right hand. She lit the cannons one by one and threw them into the lotus pond. Bang, bang, bang. The loud sound shook the ice in the pond and broke large holes. There were even fish that were blown out of the ice and flipped over their white bellies. "Hurry up and catch them. Tonight's supper is grilled fish." She lay by the lotus pond and ordered Tao Hong and Lulu to use a net to catch the fish. Yu Xiu looked on enviously and asked her for a cannon. She also wanted to set off some fish. "You have to be careful. You know Liuzi, the gatekeeper in the backyard who is missing 3 fingers, right?" Yu Xiang waved her hand and said with a strange smile. His fingers were blown off because he didn't throw the cannon in time. Yu Xiu's heart trembled. She hurriedly threw out the unlit cannon. Coincidentally, it fell into Lulu's net. Lulu was so scared that she screamed. She threw away the net and waited for a long time. When she saw that there was no movement, she realized that the firecracker was not lit at all. They looked at each other in dismay, as if relieved of a heavy burden. Yu Xiang, on the other hand, slapped his wheelchair and laughed until tears came out of his eyes. The old lady stood in the corridor and looked at the courtyard decorated with lanterns and colored banners. She felt that this year was the happiest year in Prefecture Yu. Although there were many twists and turns in the past, at the end of the year there was finally a new atmosphere. Look, your leg is so skinny even though it hasn't recovered yet. If your leg recovers, won't you be able to flip the roof and flip the roof tiles? The old lady pointed at her granddaughter who had started to fry fish again. Although she was reprimanding her, there was a hint of affection on her face. Let her be. It's just a few fish. Yu Pinyin stared at his sister with a slight smile. How many fish? I spent a lot of money to buy the lion head koi from Yangzhou. The old madam snorted softly and reprimanded. Just spoil her all you want. If she were to flip the roof tiles, I'm afraid you'd be holding the ladder from below. Yu Pinyin chuckled softly. How could that be? It's dangerous to let her climb so high. I might as well help her flip the ladder. The old lady only thought that her grandson was making fun of her, so she gave him face and laughed. She waved at the two children and said, "All right, stop playing. Don't catch a cold on such a cold day. Come in and warm yourself up." Tao Hong and Lulu quickly pushed their master into the house. Yu Pinyin held her cold little hands and rubbed them before placing them on the fire to warm them up. The old lady pulled the blanket over her granddaughter's legs and asked, "How are you? How many steps can you walk now?" "Just a dozen or so steps." Yu Xiang's smile faded. The old lady hurriedly comforted her. "Don't worry. You couldn't even stand up before. Now you can at least walk for a while. You'll get better with more practice in the future. Yes, not only can you walk but you can also run. Sooner or later you'll be able to fly." Yu Xiang nodded with certainty. The old lady was amused by her and couldn't stop laughing. Yu Pinyin pinched the tip of her nose and teased, "You can also fly now. It's fun to fly." This time, even Yu Xiu covered her mouth and laughed. Yu Miaoqi looked at them talking and laughing happily. She felt as if her heart was soaked in poison and was being corroded by bleeding holes. She bowed with a cold face. "Grandmother, I'm feeling a little unwell. I won't stay up for the new year. Goodbye." Without waiting for the old lady to nod, she walked away. The old lady's eyes darkened for a moment, but she quickly smiled again. She waved her hand and said, "Xiang'er's leg injury has just recovered. She should rest well. You should go back too. I'll stay up for the new year with your brother and sister." Yu Xiang didn't refuse. Yu Pinyin naturally went to push the wheelchair. The two walked along the corridor hung with large red lanterns. There were many plum trees on both sides of the corridor. The branches were crowded with little plum blossoms. A faint fragrance floated in the air, refreshing the mind. The night was quiet and there was no one around. The lights flickered on and off. Yu Pinyin's footsteps unconsciously slowed. She suddenly had the thought that it wouldn't be bad to walk forever. At the end of the corridor, snowflakes fluttered down like goose feathers. One of the snowflakes happened to land on the tip of Yu Xiang's nose. It melted into a cool water droplet as soon as it came into contact with her body temperature. Yu Xiang shivered and immediately giggled. Yu Pinyin also chuckled. He lowered his head and kissed the sparkling water droplet. Yu Xiang's breathing was slightly hurried. Seeing that her brother was about to kiss her lips, she hurriedly pushed him away and ordered, "Brother, stand a little further away." Yu Pinyin raised his eyebrows and took a few steps forward. A little further. A little further. It wasn't until Yu Pinyin's back was almost pressed against the pitch-black rockery that Yu Xiang nodded and said, "Okay, that's enough. Brother, stand there and don't move. I have a New Year gift for you." Yu Pinyin looked at her quietly, his eyes filled with anticipation. Yu Xiang supported herself on the handrail and slowly stood up. She stared unblinkingly at her brother with her big eyes that sparkled like stars. Then, she slowly took the first step, the second step, the third step. The goose feather-like snow dyed the gravel path white. A trail of footprints appeared on the snowy ground, extending towards the youth who was standing stiffly and had almost forgotten to breathe. Closer, closer, when there were only 3 to 4 meters left, Yu Xiang suddenly sped up and staggered into the arms of the young man, who had already spread out his arms. The strong impact sent the young man flying backward. Then he fell into the fake mountain cave behind him. The youth's back was pressed against the cold rock, but there was a warm body in his arms. A delicate fragrance dispersed the damp and cold air in the cave, leaving behind only the warmth of spring. Do you feel it? Is it tight? Yu Xiang's legs were wrapped around her brother's waist. She twisted her waist and asked. The palm of his hand was supporting his sister's round and perky buttocks. The two's most private parts were tightly pressed together. Not only were their breaths intertwined, but even their body temperature was transmitted through the fabric. His sister had said such suggestive words. A few blue veins popped out on Yu Pinyan's forehead. He felt that he would die in the hands of this little minx sooner or later. However, he gladly endured it and couldn't help but chuckle. He nibbled on her bright red lips and said vaguely, "It can be tighter." The response he received was a pair of legs wrapped tighter around his waist and a fiery kiss. The two of them crazily exchanged saliva. The snowflakes that constantly drifted into the cave couldn't cool down the burning desire in their hearts. Tao Hong and Lu Lu had been waiting outside the cave for a long time. When they saw that they were about to freeze into ice sculptures, they shouted in a trembling voice, "Miss Master Ho, it's time to go back. It's too cold outside. Be careful not to catch a cold." Yu Pinyan reluctantly pulled away. He tidied up his sister's messy hair and whispered, "Let's go. Be careful not to catch a cold." "I'm not cold at all. Look, my palms are sweating." Yu Xiang spread out her wet little hands. Yu Pinyan immediately grasped them and lowered his head to kiss them. Then he took off his cloak and wrapped her tightly before walking out. "Wait." Yu Xiang grabbed his lapel and warned, "You can't tell anyone that I can walk, especially old ancestor." "Why not?" Yu Pinyan frowned slightly. "If anyone knows, how can you openly hug me in the future? You're so stupid." Yu Xiang poked his chest with her fingertips. Yu Pinyan chuckled and bit her delicate cheek. His voice contained a thick sweetness and pampering that couldn't be dissolved. "You little minx, you really know how to think. Okay, Big Brother won't tell anyone. Big Brother will hug you forever." Only then was Yu Xiang satisfied. She bit his face as well. After the new year, the old lady began to prepare the dowry for her 2 granddaughters. Although Yu Miaoqi was younger than Yu Siyu, her wedding date was set before hers. From this, it could be seen that the old lady was anxious to marry her off. Yu Miaoqi became more anxious day by day. She often wandered outside Yu Pinyan's study, but when she saw the guards patrolling back and forth, she hurriedly avoided them. As a result, at the end of March, her wedding date was approaching. On this day, a horse suddenly galloped through the city gate. Before the guards could stop it, the soldier on the horse shouted, "Get out of the way, it's an emergency. The Western E people are attacking Ulan Chabu." The guards were shocked and quickly opened the city gate to let him pass. Emperor Chong Kong immediately convened a court meeting to discuss the war with the ministers. Originally, General Xiong Chonghai was stationed at Ulan Chabu. However, he was old and suffering from a hidden illness. A month ago, he asked his bones to retire and return to his hometown. The general who replaced him did not have any talent. This allowed the Western E people to take advantage of this loophole. The other generals were also over 50 years old. Although they all asked to fight, Emperor Chong Kong was not completely relieved. Seeing the emperor's clear eyes looking straight at him, Yu Pinyan bowed slightly and stepped forward to ask to fight. Emperor Chong Kong said yes and threw the general of Agile Cavalry's seal over, which was firmly caught by him. The ministers suddenly remembered that Commander Yu was not only the commander of the army, but also the general of Agile Cavalry who commanded millions of troops. At the age of 16, he became famous throughout the world with his 100 victories. He was the famous god of war of the great Han dynasty. Over the years he killed people like Scything Flax and made countless enemies. Everyone gradually remembered his fierce name and forgot his achievements. The ministers were speechless for a while. The emergency at the border was such a big matter. The old lady was the first to know, and her heart faintly tightened. She put down the scriptures and sighed to her granddaughter who was accompanying her. "Xiang'er, I'm afraid your brother will have to go to war again. Yu Xiang's hand accidentally broke the prayer beads. Her expression was frightened. Recite the scriptures. Try to recite the scriptures 7 times 7, 49 times before your brother leaves. Then tie a knot and let your brother wear it. The old lady took out a copper coin covered with rust from the box and placed it in her granddaughter's palm. This was a habit that the grandmother and granddaughter had developed in their early years. Whenever Yu Pinyin went to war, they would find a copper coin to pray for blessings, and let Yu Pinyin carry it with him to ward off evil spirits. Yu Xiang's throat was choked and her eyes were red. This was not the first time her brother went to war, but her mood was more uncomfortable than ever before. Her sweet life had not yet begun, but she had to face separation. It was more likely that she would be separated by life and death. She suddenly lost the courage to face the future alone. Chapter 113. Yu Pinyin didn't return home until midnight. The lights in the main courtyard were still on, so the old lady was waiting for him. "You're back? When are you leaving?" The old lady supported her forehead with one hand and supported herself with a cane with the other. She looked old and haggard. "Tonight, I'll go to the Agile Cavalry Battalion to count the soldiers. When I finish counting, I'll leave." Yu Pinyin helped her to sit on the soft couch. The old lady drank a cup of ginseng tea with trembling hands and asked, "How many soldiers do you need?" 800,000 soldiers. The old lady counted with her fingers and slowly bent her back. She sighed. "That is to say, you'll leave in half a month?" Yu Pinyin nodded in silence. The hall quieted down. After a long time, the old lady held his hand tightly and cried, "You must come back safely. Xiang'er's leg is about to recover. You must come back and see her stand up with your own eyes. You must come back." Yu Pinyin's voice was dry. "Old ancestor, don't worry. Grandson will definitely come back. I won't leave you alone." The grandmother and grandson sat opposite each other holding hands in silence. After about half an hour, the old lady said tiredly, "Go and see your sister. She's praying for you in the temple. She has been kneeling for a whole day. No matter how you persuade her, she won't listen." Yu Pinyin suppressed his anxiety and replied, "Grandson will help you back to your room and then go to see her. When grandson is not here, you must take care of your body. Don't let grandson worry about you thousands of miles away." The old lady nodded and finally showed a smile. Yu Pinyin waited until the old lady fell asleep before he walked quickly to the temple. From afar he saw Tao Hong and Lulu pacing back and forth in front of the door uneasily. When the two heard the footsteps, they turned around and saw that it was the Marquis. Their faces lit up and they hurriedly went up to report, "Marquis, you're finally back. Miss has been kneeling inside for a day. Her leg just got a little better so she can't kneel for a long time." Before he finished speaking, Yu Pinyin had already passed by like a gust of wind, leaving only the tightly closed door and 2 guards with swords guarding the door. Several rows of candles were lit in the temple, and there was a faint smell of Buddhist incense floating in the air. The bodhisattva on the niche looked at the believer kneeling at her feet with her eyes half closed. Her back was very thin, which made her look even more fragile in the flickering candlelight. Mysterious scriptures kept spilling out of her mouth, and her mellow voice was filled with the most pious prayer. When she heard the footsteps, she didn't turn around. She only paused in her recitation for a moment. Yu Pinyin strode over and knelt behind her. He stretched out his arms in front of her and wrapped her in his embrace. His big hands covered her clasped hands. He sighed faintly. "Don't kneel. Be careful not to hurt your legs." Yu Xiang turned a deaf ear and continued to chant scriptures. Yu Pinyin pried her hands apart, took out the copper coin between her palms, and threw it on the futon beside him. Then he carried her to his knees and said in a hoarse voice, "In half a month I'll be going to war. Tonight I'll come back to pack my things and move to the Agile Cavalry Battalion. I won't be able to come back to say goodbye to you until the day before the war. Don't kneel and don't chant scriptures. If you hurt your leg, I'll be restless when I go to war. On the battlefield, life and death can be decided in an instant. If I'm distracted, maybe..." Yu Xiang's numb face finally showed an angry expression. She quickly covered his mouth with her small hand and scolded, "Don't talk about life and death in front of Buddha. I won't kneel or chant scriptures. You can go if you want. Do you think I care?" In fact, she cared about him very much. She finally understood why some people loved him so much that they wanted to tie him up and hide him. She now had the impulse to tie Upinion up and lock him up. She had thought that they still had a long time together, but she suddenly realized what it meant to change things. Yesterday they were still sweetly snuggling with each other, but today they were going to the smoke-filled battlefield. She didn't dare to imagine how many disasters he would face, let alone how she would live after leaving him. She seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, and only endless fear remained in her senses. But she would never show a trace of fear in front of him. She hoped that he would set out fearlessly and come back safely. She wanted to say a few gentle words to make him feel at ease, but when the words came to her mouth, they all changed. Upinion laughed in a deep voice. "You don't care about me, but I care about you, okay? After I leave, you must take medicine on time and exercise on time. But you can't practice for too long, or you'll hurt your palms again. On the day I return in triumph, you must stand on the high city gate to welcome me." Yuseong covered her mouth and sneered. "You're so confident that I'll wait for you? Once you leave, I don't know when you'll come back. If it's short, it'll be a year, and if it's long, it'll be 3 to 5 years. How old will I be by then?" She struggled out of her brother's arms and wanted to stand up and walk gracefully, but because she had knelt for too long, her knees were numb. She tried several times but failed, so she could only sit on another praying mat. Her slender legs were crossed, one hand on the ground, and the other hand was lazily placed on her knee. She sat in an extremely seductive posture. "Look at me," she raised her hand and fiddled with her cloud-like hair, looking proud. "My appearance is not only enough to cause the downfall of a city, but also enough to outshine all the other beauties. My figure is delicate and fit, a little more would make me fat, a little less would make me thin, not too much, not too little, just right." Her fingertips slid down her cheeks and neck to her shoulders, and then she lifted her overcoat to reveal half of her snow-white, round shoulders. She continued, "Originally, breaking my legs was a big regret, but now that my legs have healed, sooner or later I'll be able to walk again. Tell me, who wouldn't want to marry such a wonderful person like me? Why do you think I'll wait for you? If you don't come back in 2 years, then I'm sorry, but I'll have to give up holding the pipa." After saying this, she narrowed her eyes and peeked at her brother's expression. How could Upinion not know that she didn't mean what she said? But he was still stabbed in the heart by her words, "Don't hold the pipa." He suddenly bullied her and bit her annoying red lips with a gloomy face. The two of them quickly tangled together. A gust of wind blew, and the flickering candlelight flickered, projecting their inseparable figures on the snow-white wall. After an intense kiss, Yuseong felt that her numb knees had recovered. She pushed away her brother who was on top of her and sat on his abdomen. She picked up the copper coins on the praying mat and stuffed them into his inner pocket. Word by word she warned him, "You must come back alive, or else I won't wait for you." The dim candlelight illuminated her tear-filled eyes, and the fear and sadness contained in them made Upinion unable to breathe. He pressed his sister into his arms. After a long time he hoarsely replied, "Okay, I'll definitely come back safely." After a pause he continued, "If there's something difficult to solve, you can go find Shin Yuanqi. He'll take care of you." Yuseong didn't answer. She only rubbed her cheek against his warm chest. The two of them quietly hugged each other for a moment. When they heard the sound of gongs and drums, they opened the door and came out. Upinion bent down to pick up his sister, but she refused. "Save your strength. I'm afraid you won't be able to sleep tonight." After saying this, she sat in the wheelchair and ordered Tao Hong and Lulu to push her. Upinion had no choice but to walk side by side with her. Seeing that they were about to arrive at Jingfu Courtyard, Yuseong suddenly grabbed his hand. She raised her head and whispered, "Brother, I'm actually lying to you. I'll always wait for you, always wait for you. If you don't come back, I'll die here. You said it before. I was born for family you and I'll die for family you. I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes were filled with sparkling tears, but she stubbornly raised her head and refused to let them fall. Her pitch-black pupils were filled with love and determination. At this moment, the moon hanging in the sky dimmed. The surrounding breeze froze. The sounds of frogs and insects in the grass came to an abrupt end. All of a sudden, there was only the girl in front of him who was so beautiful that it made his heart relax. Once again he deeply realized that, She was an existence that he could never let down. He opened his mouth wanting to give a response, but found that his throat was so tight that he couldn't utter a single word. He could only lean over, press her against the back of the chair, and crazily kiss her. He held her cheeks with both hands, not allowing her red lips to retreat for even a moment. Tao Hong and Lulu hurriedly covered their mouths to stop the exclamations that were about to overflow from their throats. Then they turned around and looked around, afraid that they would be seen by others. Fortunately, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. Everyone had already fallen asleep, and there were only quietly standing trees in the garden. The two of them were reluctant to part. After a long time they finally stopped gasping for breath. Yu Pinyin held his little sister's small face and carefully pecked her forehead, the tip of her nose and the side of her cheeks. Then he picked her up and strode back. Tao Hong and Lulu hurriedly pushed their wheelchairs to follow. After the group of people walked away, a small and thin figure came out of the artificial cave. The moonlight shone on her pale face. It was Yu Miaoqi's headmaid Bao Sheng. Miss, quickly open the door, miss." She hurriedly knocked on the door. "Why are you so noisy in the middle of the night?" The maid on night watch opened the door and covered Yu Miaoqi with a smock. "What do you want?" Yu Miaoqi supported her forehead with her hand, her face full of impatience. Bao Sheng glanced at the maid. Yu Miaoqi understood and sent her away. Then she urged, "If you have something to say, quickly say it. Don't you know what time it is?" "Miss, this servant was very hungry in the middle of the night, and wanted to go to the kitchen to get something to eat. She took out a cold and hard steamed bun from her bosom to prove that she was telling the truth. Then she continued, but I didn't expect to meet Master Ho and Miss Three on the way. Do you know what they were doing?" "What were they doing?" Yu Miaoqi's impatient expression instantly disappeared. She leaned forward slightly and stared at Bao Sheng's open and closed mouth. They were actually doing that." Bao Sheng pointed at her own lips, her face red with embarrassment. "What?" Yu Miaoqi's nerves were tense. She had a vague guess. They were kissing. Bao Sheng finished speaking in one breath. Then she lowered her head and covered her face. That scene was really hot. Just thinking about it made her feel embarrassed and indescribable. Yu Miaoqi was stunned. After a long time, she clapped her hands and laughed. She was so excited that her voice was trembling. "Good. I was wondering why Yu Pinyin would spoil a bastard so much. It turns out that they already had an affair. Good, this is really good. This time, I will definitely consign that bastard to eternal damnation." Chapter 114. Yu Pinyin had been organizing military affairs in the Agile Cavalry Battalion and collecting provisions. Half a month later, when he was about to leave, he returned home and said goodbye to his family. The old lady prepared a table of good wine and dishes for him to see him off. The delicious dishes were mouth-watering, and the wine in the cup was fragrant. However, there was no sound of toasting or laughter in the living room. The old lady resisted the urge to sigh and forced a smile. "Everyone eat. Why are you still in a daze? Come, have a drink with your big brother. I wish him a safe journey and a triumphant return." Yu Miaoqi was the first to agree. She raised her wine cup and waved it at Yu Pinyin. She smiled and said, "Big brother, here's a toast to you. I hope you'll shock the barbarians and return victorious." She took a small sip. Yu Pinyin gave her face and drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. Next was Yu Siyu. She said nothing more than auspicious things like returning to the court victoriously. Everyone looked around and found that Yu Xiang had been playing with the wine cup with her head down and didn't say anything. "Xianger, have a drink with your brother. The person he misses the most is you." The old lady reached out to stroke her hair. Yu Xiang seemed to wake up from a dream. She raised the wine cup and said briefly, "Come back alive." Then she drank it in one gulp. Before Yu Pinyin could respond, she immediately filled her own cup and drank it. After drinking 4 or 5 cups, she wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. She opened her mouth slightly and let out a very delicate burp. Her cheeks slowly turned red. At this time, the old lady finally realized that her granddaughter was very unhappy and wanted to get herself drunk. She wanted to stop her but found that everything she said was empty words. Instead, she imitated her granddaughter and drank several cups of wine. Finally, she let out a long sigh. It's not good to drink on an empty stomach. Eat more food. Yu Pinyin put away the wine cups and gently advised. Yu Xiang didn't have a wine cup, so she directly picked up the wine pot and poured it into her mouth. When Yu Pinyin tried to grab it, the wine pot was already half empty. Her face was red and her eyes were hazy. She held her cheek with one hand and put food in Yu Pinyin's bowl with the other. She smiled foolishly. Brother, eat it while it's hot. When we get to Shijiang, we can only eat dry food. This steamed sea bass is your favorite. So is this braised meatball, and this chestnut-stewed pigtail. Although she was very drunk, she could count her brother's preferences with her eyes closed. She only stopped when her brother's bowl was full and almost overflowed. She looked up at the sky and pretended to think. Let me think what else brother likes to eat. Your favorite food isn't on the table. Here it's peach-flavored. As she spoke, she moved closer to her brother and slightly pouted her red lips. Tao Hong and Lulu couldn't help but cover their faces. Yu Pinyin, however, had a smile in his eyes. He put his big palm on the back of her head and pressed her red face into his arms. He also stopped her from saying anything. He helplessly said to the old lady, Xiang'er is drunk. I'll take her back first. The old lady didn't suspect anything. She waved her hand and said, Go. She's upset. You should persuade her. Yu Pinyin nodded. He held his sister up like he was holding a baby and let her head rest on his shoulder. The two of them looked very intimate. However, because they were brother and sister on the surface, and because Yu Xiang couldn't walk, no one had suspected them for so many years. Yu Miaoqi stared at the backs of the two of them as they walked away. His eyes flashed. At first, Yu Pinyin walked very slowly. When he felt the little girl buried her head in his neck and licking his collarbone, his muscles instantly tensed up. He forcefully patted the soft buttocks under his palm. Yu Xiang didn't stop. Instead, she used her teeth to bite and grind. A numbing sensation spread throughout his body like an electric current, causing Yu Pinyin to breathe heavily and his eyes to turn red. He couldn't help but quicken his pace. After entering the room, he threw the tormenting little girl on the soft quilt and warned in a hoarse voice, Xiang'er, don't mess around. I'm not messing around. Yu Xiang turned over on the bed and half sat up. Her smile was very bright. Brother, come closer. I have a parting gift for you. What gift? Yu Pinyin stood in the same place, unmoved. To myself. She chuckled as she took off her smock. Following that, she also took off her skirt and undergarment. The girl's snow-white body emitted a faint fluorescence under the sunlight. Not a single pore could be found on her body. Even the most private part of her body was as smooth as jade. Her plump breasts trembled as she leaned forward, making one's mouth go dry. Her face was a little shy, but it was more charming and amorous. Her little hand slowly slid down the seductive curves of her body until it reached that part. Brother, this is my parting gift for you. Do you like it? If you want it, everything of mine is yours. Her charming eyes were like silk. She waved her free hand at her brother. Yu Pinyin's entire body stiffened. He felt that sooner or later, he would die in the hands of this little seductress. This feeling was so strong at this moment. He took a small step forward followed by a big one. Then, he suddenly leaned on the little seductress's body and frantically stroked her smooth body. She was like a silverfish. As long as he relaxed his strength, she would slip away from his arms. Because of this illusion, Yu Pinyin grabbed her slender waist with one hand and pressed her buttocks against his hard part with the other. Based on his male instincts, he rubbed against her body. At the same time, he used his lips to worship every part of her body. Yu Xiang bowed, raised her head, squinted her eyes. Her slightly opened red lips spat out a painful and joyful moan. Seeing that her brother was dressed neatly, she muttered unfair and tore off his outer robe. Her little hand reached into his clothes and stroked his neatly arranged 8-pack abs. Then she moved down and grabbed. Yu Pinyin gasped. He almost passed out from the little seductress's hand. Sure enough, he would die in the hands of this little seductress sooner or later. He sweated profusely. The noises coming from the room were weirder than ever before. Tao Hong and Liulu looked at each other. Their eyes filled with the words, should we stop it or not? After the brother and sister left, Yu Siyu also got up to leave. Yu Miaoqi whispered into the old lady's ear, "Grandmother, let me tell you a piece of bad news. Your most beloved grandson and granddaughter might already have an affair. Who knows what they're doing right now? Do you want to go and take a look?" The old lady stared at her with a cold gaze. After a long while, she suddenly got up and walked quickly to Jingfu courtyard. Yu Miaoqi sneered silently and quickly followed. Halfway there, the two of them didn't notice a colorful parrot flying over their heads. Tao Hong and Lu Lu were in a dilemma. They saw a Lu who had gone out to get some fresh air flutter her wings and land on the golden frame in the corridor. She shouted at the top of her lungs, "The old ancestor is here! The old ancestor is here!" "Oh no, the old lady is here!" Tao Hong quickly knocked on the door. Lu took out a walnut and stuffed it in Alu's mouth. Alu liked to eat alone. She held the walnut in her mouth and flew away. In the room, Yu Pinyin had already heard the noise. He quickly helped each other get dressed and tucked his sister into bed. He didn't do this to avoid responsibility, but to protect his sister. Even if they wanted to publicize their relationship, they couldn't do it in such an embarrassing situation. A moment later, the old lady led Yu Miaoqi into the courtyard, followed by Mama Ma Wan Qiu, and the others who didn't know what was going on. The old lady was so anxious that she even forgot to send the servants away. She walked to the unlatched door and suddenly came back to her senses. She waved her hand and said, "You can all go back. Don't follow me." Mama Ma and the others immediately left. The old lady reached out to push the door, but her fingertips stopped the moment before they touched the door. She was a little timid. She didn't know how to deal with such a scene. Yu Miaoqi was one step ahead of her and opened the door. Then she frowned. Yu Pinyin was neatly dressed and sitting by the bed with a gentle expression on his face. Yu Xiang was lying in bed with her eyes closed and her cheeks flushed. She was sleeping very soundly. There was an empty bowl on the bedside table. It must have been filled with hangover soup. This scene was very normal and very heartwarming. It was just an older brother taking care of his drunk sister. Yu Miaoqi was stunned for a moment before he felt deeply disappointed. He looked at the old lady with a guilty conscience. The old lady stepped forward and whispered, "Is Xiang okay? I was worried that her leg injury would be affected by drinking too much, so I came to take a look." "She's fine. She fell asleep after singing for a while." Yu Pinyin smiled and shook his head. Yu Xiang loved to sing when she was drunk. She could sing from Peking opera to Kunku opera, then from Kunku opera to Huangmei ballads. She twisted her waist and danced with her small hands. The old lady couldn't help laughing and said, "Then let's all go out and let her have a good sleep. Why don't you wait for Xiang to wake up before you leave? If she doesn't see you when she opens her eyes, I'm afraid she'll make a fuss." "No, I'm leaving now. She's grown up and sensible. She won't make a fuss." Yu Pinyin bent down and squeezed his sister's small hand that was resting on the pillow. "I hope so." The old lady sighed silently. Yu Miaoqi took the opportunity to lift Yu Xiang's blanket while the two of them were talking. She only gave up when she saw that she was neatly dressed in the same clothes that she had worn for dinner. Yu Pinyin glanced at her coldly, but the old lady didn't even want to look at her. She turned around and left. Knowing that her brother was about to leave, Yu Xiang wanted to throw herself around his neck and ask him to take her to Shijiang. She also wanted to beg him to come back safely. However, she had no choice but to lie straight on the bed because she was acting. After a long time, Lu pushed the door open and entered. He said softly, "Miss, Master Ho has already left. He asked you to take good care of yourself." Yu Xiang turned over and sat up. She hugged the blanket and wept silently. Lu fetched a basin of water to help her wipe her face. He stammered, "Miss, did you and Master Ho succeed just now?" "Almost." Yu Xiang blew her nose with a handkerchief. Her tone was very depressed. Lu, on the other hand, seemed to be relieved of a heavy burden, and the corners of her mouth curled up into a smile. It was good that they didn't succeed. Miss losing her chastity was a small matter. In any case, she wouldn't marry anyone other than Master Ho. However, if she accidentally got pregnant, Master Ho was so far away that he wouldn't be able to take care of her and her son. Yu Xiang was blinded by Lulu's smile. She said angrily, "You heartless thing. Your son-in-law is on the battlefield and you're still smiling so happily. Get lost." Chapter 115. After the matriarch sent her grandson away, she sat in the hall in a daze. Yumiauchi's words kept replaying in her mind, and she couldn't let it go. You said the two of them? She rubbed her temples and looked at Mama Ma, who was standing to the side. Without waiting for Mama Ma to answer, someone reported from outside. The old lady, second miss, is here. Let her in. Yumiauchi walked in slowly, followed by a pale-faced Bao Sheng. After paying her respects, she waved at Bao Sheng. Come here and tell grandmother what you saw. Bao Sheng knelt down and told her grandmother everything she saw that night in a trembling voice. Then she buried her head and trembled. Good girl, it's so late and you're still walking around in the foo. The matriarch's calm expression suddenly turned cold as she ordered. Take her away and force her to be mute. Sell her in a few days. When she said this, she repeatedly recalled the scene of her grandson and granddaughter interacting with each other. Only then did she realize that the two's intimacy had long surpassed that of a normal sibling relationship. How could a 15-year-old girl let her brother carry her around every day? How could a brother stay by her side all night when his sister was sick? This attentiveness and concern clearly showed that he cared for his beloved. Bao Sheng looked up in horror and screamed, Miss, I beg you to save this servant. Didn't you promise that nothing would happen to this servant? You can't go back on your word. What are you screaming for? Stuff her mouth and drag her away. The matriarch smashed the teacup in her hand and turned to look at Yumiauchi. She warned her word by word. You should also watch your mouth. Yumiauchi didn't answer and instead asked grandmother, how do you plan to deal with Yuxiang? She'll be drowned in the pond for committing adultery. It's not up to you to decide how to deal with her. Don't tell me you want to help her get away with it? If that's the case, granddaughter can't agree. If I'm unhappy and spread this matter, your precious grandsons will be ruined. Yumiauchi covered her mouth and chuckled. There's no evidence. Go ahead and say it. The matriarch closed her eyes and snorted. What proof do you need for this kind of thing? It's enough as long as others believe it. Yumiauchi calmly admired the nail polish she had just applied. What are you going to do? Old Madame Fu wanted to force Yumiauchi out of the house as well. Although she was disappointed in her two grandsons, she had been distressed for more than 20 years. How could her feelings be so easily erased? Nothing, I'm not a vicious person. Why don't you hurry up and find a husband for Yuxiang? By the time De Ge came back and found out that what was done could not be undone, he had no choice but to give up. What do you think? The old lady's heart trembled. She waved her hand and said, I'll think about it. You can go back. You should know that no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Now that something has happened to Yandere and Xiang'er, you won't be any better off. I know. Yumiauchi chuckled and left. A few days later, the family that had originally arranged a marriage for Yumiauchi sent a servant to deliver a letter, saying that their master had suddenly fallen ill. Now she couldn't even walk, and her future was uncertain. The marriage would be delayed. If she could recover, then they would get married. If she couldn't, then they would send someone to cancel the marriage. The Marquis family was extremely powerful, so they didn't dare to make any requests. When Yumiauchi heard the news, she breathed a sigh of relief. She secretly thought that that person was really resourceful. Old Madame Fu only thought that this person was cursed by a loner. After sighing for a while, she began to arrange the marriage between Yuxiu and Yuxiang. That's right, after much consideration, she decided to marry off her granddaughter before her grandson came back. Just as she was asking people to look around, her mother's sister-in-law suddenly sent a letter, saying that she had found a good man for Xiang'er. This person was an old friend of her mother's family. He was also from a scholarly family. He had just turned 17 this year, and was the eldest son of the first wife. He had 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters, but they were all sons and daughters of concubines. They couldn't be compared to him. His father held a position in the Ministry of Works. His position wasn't high, but he had made great contributions to the flood control project. He was someone who valued learning over fame and fortune. Under his father's influence, he was also infatuated with learning. When he was 8 years old, he became famous. When he was 12 years old, he was able to become a scholar. If his father hadn't said that he was still young and needed a few more years of experience, Shin Yuanqi probably wouldn't have been able to become the top scholar last year. Not only was this person talented, he was also handsome and didn't look like an ordinary person. His noble character was praised by everyone. In a few years, he would definitely overshadow the current Junjie like Yu Pinyin and Shin Yuanqi. How could such a good person like Xiang'er? It wasn't that the matriarch belittled herself, but her granddaughter was spoiled by her grandson. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to stand her naughty personality. After several letters, the matriarch found out that this person had seen Yu Xiang at the Baiyun Taoist temple last year. He was amazed by her and couldn't forget her. He wanted to marry her as his wife. Although his father didn't care about fame and fortune, his mother was good at scheming. She wanted to climb up the ranks of the marquis household. When she heard that Master Ku Hui had cured Yu Xiang's broken leg, and that she would be no different from ordinary people in the future, she had this idea. The matriarch thought about it several times and finally agreed. She was afraid that her granddaughter would resist, so she kept it a secret. On this day, Shin Yuanqi had just arrived at the yamen when he saw one of Yu Pinyin's Chong Sui waiting by the door. He led the person into the room and asked in a low voice, "What orders does your Master Ho have?" Master Ho asks the Lord Shun to recognize Miss Three immediately. The Chong Sui bowed and replied. Yu Pinyin was far away on the western expedition, so he naturally couldn't send a letter back. However, before he left, he said that if the matriarch wanted to arrange a marriage for Miss Three, then let the Lord Shun recognize Miss Three as soon as possible. Yu Pinyin's eyes and ears were everywhere in the marquis household. How could the matriarch's private actions be hidden from him? Even if he wasn't there, he still left a lot of ways for his sister. Shin Yuanqi hurriedly stood up and knocked over the chair behind him. He said incoherently, "He's finally willing? Why is he willing? No, I'll go change my clothes. Wait a moment." After changing out of his official's robe, he finally calmed down. He frowned and asked, "Why did your Master Ho agree to let me recognize Xiang'er? But what's going on in the marquis household?" Reporting to the Lord Shun, the old lady wants to marry Miss Three off. Marry who? Shin Yuanqi felt very uncomfortable that his sister's marriage was being manipulated by the family Yu. Marry the Lord Sun's eldest son, Sun Mingjie, the assistant minister of works. Although Sun Mingjie was young, he had a reputation for being talented. Moreover, he was handsome and had a noble character. In a few years he would be a romantic figure. Shin Yuanqi didn't expect the family Yu to be able to find such a good husband for his sister. He immediately looked at the Chong Sui with a puzzled gaze. At this juncture, he was asked to recognize his sister. His sister's marriage was bound to change. Although he was now promoted to a fourth-rank official of the Supreme Court, if he used his connections to find another marriage for his sister, he wouldn't be able to find a better candidate than Sun Mingjie. Even if the old lady took his place, he had to admit that this was a good marriage. The old lady really loved his sister as her own granddaughter. Chong Sui didn't answer. He took out a red and white brocade from his sleeve. Shin Yuanqi unfolded the brocade and saw that it was a letter written in blood. Because of the passage of time, the color of the blood had turned brown. It also had a fishy smell. The words written between the lines were frightening. This was a letter written by a woman before her death. She said that she used to be Sun Mingjie's personal maidservant. Because she couldn't stand his various insults and abuses, she committed suicide. She hoped that her family would take this letter to the yamen to redress her grievances. After Shin Yuanqi finished reading, his fingertips trembled. He asked in a deep voice, "Where did you find this?" The torture described in the brocade was simply appalling. Even the dragon scale guard would have to admit defeat if they saw it. He really couldn't imagine that Sun Mingjie hid such a ferocious face under his gentle appearance. The so-called beast in human clothing was nothing more than this. If Xiang'er married him, he didn't know what kind of torture she would suffer. Master Ho has his own connections. Lord Shun, you don't need to be suspicious. Madam Sun has already suppressed this case. Even the Lord Sun hasn't heard of it. The outside world has no way of knowing. It was really lucky to find this letter. This matter concerns Miss Three's life. Lord Shen, please help. On behalf of Master Ho, this servant thanks the Lord Shen for his help. Chang Sui bowed deeply with an anxious expression. Shen Yuanqi quickly helped him up and said, Xiang is my only family. Saving her is saving me. I should be thanking your master Ho. Let's go. I'll go pick up Xiang and bring her back. The two hurried to the Marquis household. In order to avoid arousing suspicion, Chang Sui went back through the back door. Shen Yuanqi was led to the main hall by a servant. Shen greets old madam. I haven't seen old madam for a few days. Is old madam still well? Everything is well. Lord Shen, please sit down. May I know why you've come? For the matter of Xiang, returning to her ancestral home. At this point, the fake smile on old madam's face finally disappeared. She put down the teacup with a clang and said in a deep voice, Lord Shen, are you confused? What does my family's Xiang have to do with you? Shen isn't confused. The confused one is old madam. If old madam didn't insist on marrying Xiang to such a person, Shen wouldn't have rashly come to disturb Xiang peace. Shen Yuanqi said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Marrying such a person? Lord Shen, tell me, what kind of person is Sun Mingji? Which part of him isn't worthy of Xiang? I know that as Xiang older brother, you won't be comfortable if you can't ask about Xiang marriage. However, my love for Xiang isn't any less than yours. The husband I'm looking for her is naturally the best. Old madam's words were sonorous. Marrying Sun Mingjie? When did I want to marry Sun Mingjie? Yu Xiang, who had rushed over after hearing the news, asked loudly. The faces of everyone in the hall changed. Old madam hurriedly sent all the servants away, leaving only Mama Ma to serve her. While she was still considering how to appease her granddaughter, Yu Xiang sneered again. I was wondering why old madam's gaze on me has become stranger and stranger recently. You've also become more and more silent when facing me. It turns out that you already knew about my brother and me. She waved her hand and ordered Tao Hong and Lulu to push her into the hall. She slowly said, since old madam already knows, I'll tell you frankly here. I won't marry anyone except for my brother. That's Sun Mingjie. Please help me get back as soon as possible. You shut up. Old madam angrily slammed the table, shaking all the tea sets to the ground and smashing them into pieces. Shen Yuanqi, on the other hand, was completely stunned. He kept thinking about the words I won't marry anyone but my brother. Then he felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck him from the top of his head, waking him up. No wonder Yu Pinyin said that when he reached marriageable age, he would recognize his sister. No wonder he was so anxious about his sister's marriage. Turned out that he had this idea. Chapter 116. Old madam smashed the tea set in exchange for a moment of silence in the hall. Then she said in a low voice, let's talk in private. There are outsiders here. If she didn't make it clear today, she wouldn't be able to do so after Shen Yuanqi left. Old madam would definitely force her to marry someone else. Her legs were inconvenient and she was a junior. She wouldn't even be able to resist. Yu Xiang's mind raced. She already understood that she had no choice but to leave with Shen Yuanqi today. Outsiders. She looked around and asked, how can there be outsiders here? Seeing old madam glancing at Shen Yuanqi, she said firmly, he's not an outsider. He's my brother. Shen Yuanqi's anger instantly dissipated because of this sentence. Old madam exploded. She asked sternly, what do you mean? Are you planning to leave with him? Great, I worked so hard to raise you and you want to leave just like that? You really have no conscience. As she spoke, tears flowed down her face. Yu Xiang also had tears in her eyes. She replied, I don't want to leave either. You're forcing me. How do I have no conscience? You raised me, and I want to be your granddaughter-in-law. Isn't that very conscientious? Can't you just treat it as raising a child bride for your family? I'll be filial to you in the future. No different from now. What's so bad about me that you have to marry me off? I'm good at housekeeping. I'm beautiful. I have a graceful figure. Although I'm a bit naughty, I never look for trouble. I can be considered as supporting the family. Oh, are you disdaining me because I can't walk? She propped herself up from the wheelchair and walked steadily in front of old madam. She said, look, I can walk now. I can walk more than 50 meters in one breath. In the future, I can walk 100 meters. After that, I'll be like a normal person. What's not good about me? I'll change. For her brother, she was ready to risk everything. Old Madam roared. You're good in every way except for one thing. You and Yandere are siblings. You two being together is incest. I will never agree. If my brother and I are siblings, then who is Shen Yuanqi? Yuxiang walked a few steps to Shen Yuanqi's side, grabbed one of his arms and asked rhetorically. I don't care. In short, in my heart, you two are brother and sister. This will never change. The old lady fell onto the soft couch, looking exhausted. Family, you people were all stubborn. Once they had decided on something, they would never change it. Yuxiang's straight back suddenly collapsed, but she desperately blinked her eyes to prevent her tears from falling. At this moment, she missed her elder brother who was far away in Shijiang. She missed his gentle and deep voice. She missed his arms that always gave her a sense of security. She missed his lingering kisses. In Shun's heart, Xiang'er is my younger sister. This will never change. Old Madam arbitrarily arranged a marriage for my younger sister, but she doesn't know what position I am in? Shun came today to take my younger sister home. Let's cancel the marriage. Shen Yuanqi, who had been silent all this time, slowly opened his mouth. Lord Shun, it wasn't easy for me to arrange a good man like Sun Mingjie for Xiang'er. In my heart, I'm really planning for her. If you ruin this marriage, I don't know if there will be a better candidate in the future. Old Madam tried her best to persuade him. Shen Yuanqi took out the blood letter from his sleeve pocket and put it on. While Old Madam was reading it, he waved to Yuxiang. Go and pack your things. Today you will leave with Big Brother. Yuxiang looked at the blood letter with a puzzled expression. I'll tell you about this matter in detail when we go back. Go quickly. Shen Yuanqi gave her a comforting smile. Yuxiang sat back in the wheelchair and was pushed out by Tao Hong and Lulu. After Old Madam finished reading the blood letter, her mind was in a mess. As long as she thought about how she almost handed over Xiang'er to such an evil spirit, she felt a chill run through her meridians and body. If Yandere came back from the border and found clues, wouldn't he go to Sun Mingjie's family and chop them all up? Then this matter would certainly be big. With her grandson's temper, the probability of this happening was 100%. Old Madam threw the blood letter far away. In the blink of an eye, her head was full of cold sweat. When she came back to her senses, she found that her granddaughter had already gone back to pack her things. She hurriedly used her walking stick to stop her. Grandmother and granddaughter pulled each other back and forth, causing Jingfu Courtyard to be in an uproar. The servants all ran to watch the show. Even the patrolling guards heard the commotion and rushed over. In the chaos, no one noticed that Yu Miaoqi secretly opened the side door and went into Yu Pinyan's study next door. She didn't have any loyal servants by her side. Although this kind of thing had hidden risks, she had to do it herself. When Yu Miaoqi came back wiping her cold sweat, Yuxiang had already left. He only took a few pieces of clothes and 2 maidservants with him. The rest of the things were left untouched. She didn't know if it was because of anger or guilt. Old Madam ordered the guards to seal off the entire courtyard. She said that no one was allowed to enter or leave until Master Ho came back. Yu Miaoqi secretly said that it was a close call. She originally wanted to take advantage of Yuxiang's wedding to put that thing in. However, Shen Yuanqi's arrival destroyed her original plan, but also gave her a new opportunity. She knew that if this matter was caused, Family Yu would face the danger of 9 generations being executed. However, when Master Ho was alive, Old Madam Yu had saved the Emperor and was granted a death exemption token by the late Emperor. Master Ho was clever and took back the death exemption token. He only wanted the promise of not punishing women and children. In other words, if a man from Family Yu committed a crime, the Family Yu's women and children would never be implicated. This was also the reason why she dared to be ordered by that person without being afraid of being implicated. Since this family couldn't tolerate her, it was better to directly destroy it. On the rolling carriage, Yuxiang was digesting the fact that Sun Mingjie was a sadist. She clutched her lapel, only feeling waves of lingering fear. If Shen Yuanqi hadn't arrived in time, she would have died soon after marrying into the Sun family, and Yuxiang's original ending should have been the same. This was really a wonderful and hair-raising fate. Don't be afraid, brother won't let anyone hurt you. Shen Yuanqi raised his hand to hold her pale and cold fingertips, but his hand was avoided. His eyes dimmed for a moment. Yu Xiang turned her head away, not wanting to see his disappointed expression, and said firmly, I want to marry brother. Yu Pinyin, just tell me if you agree or not. If you don't agree, then send me to Xiahe village. I bought a field there, and the people guarding the field are all old subordinates of Master Ho and Yu Pinyin. I'll be safe. She wanted to quietly wait for her brother to come back. Shen Yuanqi saw that her eyes were full of vigilance, and her right hand was even holding the carriage door, as if she would jump down at any time if he shook his head. He was angry and amused and asked, in the eyes of outsiders, you and Yu Pinyin are blood-related siblings. Even if you acknowledge your ancestors and marry him, it's inevitable that people will gossip. In the future, when you go out to socialize and worship Buddha, you will be pointed and jabbed. Aren't you afraid? Yu Xiang slightly raised her chin and said in a proud tone, what am I afraid of? Their mouths are on other people's bodies and let them talk. It's not like I'll lose 2 pieces of meat. They're worried about me, but I'm happy and carefree. Who are you calling stupid? Aren't you also often scolded as a slave, but in half a year you rose 4 levels in a row? Did the people who scolded you benefit? I'm afraid that not only did they not benefit, but they also vomited a few pounds of blood in their hearts. Slanderers should go to hell with their tongues pulled out. When they die, they'll know what's good for them. First, I don't offend anyone. Second, I don't commit arson. Third, I don't harm others for my own benefit. What am I afraid of? Since I dare to do it, I naturally dare to accept it. Shen Yuanqi knew that the situation was not right, but he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Xiang was far cuter, more carefree, and more straightforward than he had imagined. No matter how difficult the situation was, she would not be afraid, nor would she shrink back. She would only face difficulties head-on. This was very similar to the family Shen people. You dare to accept what you do. Well said. I won't interfere with the matter between you and Yu Pinyin. Everything can be discussed when he comes back. What do you think? Seeing that the vigilance in his sister's eyes had not yet subsided, he continued, I promise you that before Yu Pinyin comes back, I won't help you find a husband. After all, you're a girl and your legs are inconvenient. It's not safe for you to live alone in the field. Moreover, if you want to marry Yu Pinyin, you have to have a decent identity, right? When we go back, I'll have the clan elders change the family tree and let you be the daughter of the family Shen. From now on, you'll be called Shen Xiang, okay? After being called Yu Xiang for 2 lifetimes, suddenly having to change her name to Shen Xiang naturally made her feel uncomfortable. Yu Xiang was about to shake her head, but then she remembered that after marrying her brother, she would have to take on her husband's surname. She could also change her name back, so she nodded slightly. Shen Yuanqi was in a good mood. Ignoring his sister's small head that was trying to avoid him, he pulled her over and rubbed her head. He smiled and said, we brother and sister are finally reunited. If father and mother knew about this in the underworld, they would also be happy. After saying this, he was silent for a moment, and his eyes revealed a hint of grief. Yu Xiang waited for him to regain his senses before slowly opening her mouth. Although I already knew that you were my biological brother, to tell you the truth, you and I have never spent even a day together. Naturally, our feelings can't compare to brother Yu's. But since we have already recognized each other, and are the only family in the world, I will try my best to accept you. Us brother and sister will help each other and support the family Shen together, so that we won't let down father and mother who passed away. Shen Yuanqi, my big brother, from now on please take care of me. She took the initiative to reach out her hand and shook Shen Yuanqi's large hand. These words were said very calmly and honestly, causing Shen Yuanqi's heart to move greatly. He suddenly realized that there was a huge gap between his biological sister and Yu Miaoqi. If it was Yu Miaoqi today, he was afraid that she would be dissatisfied with the sudden lowering of her status, but she would use affectionate behavior to cover up this dissatisfaction. She was completely unlike Yu Xiang, who said what was in her heart without any pretense. Who wouldn't like such a true and frank sister? Shen Yuanqi held his sister's small hand and smiled happily. Because Master Xue had given Shen Yuanqi a new lease on life. Although Shen Yuanqi bought a house, he still lived with the Xue family. When the two arrived, the Xue family was eating. When they saw Yu Xiang sitting in a wheelchair, they looked as if they had seen a ghost. Yu Xiang's mischievous and unreasonable reputation was known by everyone in the capital. Master Shui and young Master Shui only touched wine glasses and spilled wine, but the Shui family's womenfolk looked as if a great disaster was about to befall them, especially the two Miss Shui. They hugged each other and trembled. Chapter 117. In the end, Lord Shui had experienced great storms, so he quickly regained his composure and stepped forward to ask, Zichang, Shen Yuanqi's courtesy name, why did you bring Miss Three back? Shen Yuanqi stepped forward and replied, adoptive father, Xiang'er is my younger sister, so she should naturally come back with me. There was a flurry of banging sounds as someone dropped their rice bowl and chopsticks. Your younger sister? What is the meaning of this? Xiang'er is my long-lost younger sister. It's a long story. Shen Yuanqi pushed his younger sister into the hall. After sitting down, he briefly recounted the events of the past, leaving the Shui family members dumbfounded. After explaining the cause and effect, Shen Yuanqi continued, this time I brought Xiang'er back because I plan to have her acknowledge her ancestors. What does adoptive father think? Lord Shui only recognized Shen Yuanqi as his adoptive son, and didn't want him to change his surname. At this time, he naturally couldn't intervene in his family affairs and could only nod in agreement. While the two were talking, Yu Xiang was also imperceptibly sizing up the people in the hall. Although Madame Shui concealed it extremely well, the depths of her eyes occasionally flashed with loathing and worry. She was probably on guard against Shen Yuanqi. This was no wonder. Young Master Shui was disappointing. Today, the Shui family was completely supported by Shen Yuanqi alone. After a long time, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't become greedy for the Shui family's vast family business. Young Master Shui was open-minded by nature, his eyes smiling. He really did treat Shen Yuanqi as a brother of different surnames. The other concubine-born children had been taught by Madame Shui to be submissive. They usually ate in their own small courtyard and didn't show their faces at this time. Madame Shui gave birth to two daughters. One was 12 years old and the other was the same age as Yu Xiang. Their heads were lowered and their expressions couldn't be seen, but from their tightly clasped hands, one could see that they were uneasy about having a stranger in their home. He probably couldn't stay in the Shui family for long. After a long time, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't become dirty. Yu Xiang inwardly pondered. Shen Yuanqi and Lord Shui discussed the matter of returning to their ancestral home. Only then did Madame Shui open her mouth to let the siblings sit down and eat. No one spoke in the hall, only the sound of chopsticks hitting the plates could be heard. Yu Xiang tasted as if she was chewing on wax. She missed the time when her brother was still around. When they were eating at the same table, she could secretly poke her brother's thigh with the tip of her finger and make him change his expression. She could slightly pout and ask him for a kiss. Even if she accidentally ate the hottest chili because she was absent-minded, she could still taste the sweetness on the tip of her tongue. Her brother had left, but it was as if he had taken away all the happiness in her life. Yu Xiang couldn't help but tear up as she ate. Shen Yuanqi secretly sighed in his heart, as he put down the bowl and chopsticks and said, we're done eating. Xiang'er is new here, so I'll show her around the mansion. Godfather, godmother, please enjoy your meal. Let Jai and Jine bring Miss Shen there. They're easy to talk to. You stay. Acknowledging your ancestors is a big matter. I need to discuss it with you. After all, Lingnan is a high mountain and the road is long. You also have an official position and can't leave. We need to find someone reliable to do it. Lord Shui smiled. Shen Yuanqi looked at his sister. Seeing her wave her hand indifferently, he could only stay. The Shui family was considered a prestigious family in Lingnan. Although they were now declining, their foundation was still there. As the eldest daughter of the Shui family, Shui Jai had a bit of a noble aura. In contrast, the second daughter of the Shui family, Shui Jine, was much inferior. When she saw Yu Xiang pick up the horsewhip and play with it, her face turned pale and she found an excuse to leave. Shui Jai also didn't urge her to stay. She led Yu Xiang to stroll around the back garden. When they came across a slightly flat road, she took the initiative to push the wheelchair. Miss Yuxiang is such a famous person, but I didn't expect that one day you would fall to this point. The world is really unpredictable. She suddenly leaned over and whispered in Yuxiang's ear. Finally, she looked back at Yuxiang and smiled brightly. Have I ever offended you? Yuxiang asked with a frown. Never. Shuejai shook her head. She just couldn't stand Yuxiang. It wasn't that she didn't offend her. She once saw Yuxiang from afar at the spring banquet hosted by the crown princess. She was clearly a cripple with a broken leg. But she laughed more arrogantly than anyone else. She didn't know who mentioned her name, but the volume was a bit louder. When she glanced over with a cold gaze, everyone held their breath. The scene was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. A few days after she came back, she still felt her heart palpitate from that scene. After the palpitations, she felt contempt. What was there to be afraid of? She was just using her power to bully others. Without power and status, she was just a cripple. Her imagination at that time had unexpectedly become reality. Although she had no grievances or enmity with Yuxiang, Shuejai felt a burst of pleasure. When this matter spread throughout the capital, there would be more people who would feel happy. How could Yuxiang not understand these people's mentality of adding insult to injury? She sneered. Then, I can't avoid offending Miss Shui today. Shuejai's heart trembled. She heard her continue. Being able to recognize my ancestors and return to the clan is a great thing. But Miss Shui used the word fallen in her mouth. It can be seen how lowly my older brother is in Miss Shui's heart, and how miserable it is to return to his side. Although my older brother is now a fourth-rank court official, in Miss Shui's heart, I'm afraid that he is still the Shui family's servant. No, I didn't mean that. Shuejai hurriedly explained. Then why did you mock me for falling to such a state? What kind of state is this? Can Miss Shui dispel my doubts? Yuxiang blinked with a confused expression. Shuejai's cheeks flushed red. She was speechless. Yuxiang sneered, I won't feel lowly just because I return to my older brother's side. And I won't feel ashamed because of my older brother's past experience as a servant. Miss Shui, it's best if you speak to me in the future. Although I'm not the family you Miss 3, I'm still the Minister of Agriculture that was conferred by the Emperor. If you really want to talk about rank, your father and mother will have to salute me when they see me. Shuejai's flushed cheeks instantly turned pale. Just as she was in a dilemma, she heard Shen Yuanqi's gentle voice from not too far away, Xianger, it's time to go back. Shuejai didn't know how long he had been standing there and how much he had heard. She suddenly felt so ashamed that she wanted to die. She lifted her skirt and hurriedly ran away. Tao Hong and Lulu were focused on admiring the flowers. They didn't stand up for their master because they knew that in front of their master, all the noble maidens in the capital were paper tigers. Shen Yuanqi pushed his younger sister back to her room. After sitting down, he poured her a cup of hot tea. His face was expressionless. Yuxiang took a small sip and frankly said, older brother, although Master Shui treats you well, Madame Shui is still on guard against you. After a long time, it's hard to guarantee that she won't whisper something into Master Shui and young Master Shui's ears. If you don't covet the Shui family business, it's best if we move out as soon as possible to prevent our benefactor from turning into an enemy. Shen Yuanqi raised his brows and asked, then what if I covet the Shui family business? Then I can only say that water has entered your brain, and advise you to think twice before you act. What's the point of losing your good reputation for such a small thing? Don't pick up sesame seeds and lose the watermelon. Yuxiang was as patient as a child who had lost his footing. Indeed, the emperor placed him in an important position because he didn't have any foundation. The second reason was because he knew how to repay kindness and valued friendship. If he took over the Shui family business, his future career would be cut off. Shen Yuanqi was just casually asking, but seeing his younger sister so serious, he couldn't help but laugh. Once again, he became aware of the huge difference between Yu Miaoqi and his younger sister. Yu Miaoqi had always been strong since she was young. She had to take everything she could get her hands on for herself. Otherwise, she would never give up. If he had asked Yu Miaoqi just now, the other party's eyes would probably light up and she would actively come up with a plan for him. Her temperament was also spoiled by her late parents. In the past, they would always whisper in her ear that she was a noble person and that sooner or later, She would get the best of everything in the world. However, it turned out that they were distorting her nature, and in the end, they molded her into the greedy and selfish person she was today. It was the family Shun who had killed Yu Miaoqi by flattering her. After coming to this conclusion, Shen Yuanqi's mood was very subtle. He couldn't tell if it was more hatred or guilt. The brother and sister discussed for a long time. They both felt that living in the Shui family wasn't a long-term plan. The next day, they greeted Master Shui and sent people to clean up the empty residence. Master Shui tried every possible way to persuade them to stay, but Shen Yuanqi was determined. He also had family members by his side, so he could only let them go. However, he still did his best to complete the matter of Yu Xiang returning to the family. In just a few days, the news that Yu Xiang wasn't a family Yu's bloodline and was actually Shen Zhuangyun's younger sister was known by everyone. In the past, Yu Xiang had offended many people, but there weren't many who came looking for trouble. There were only 4 reasons. First, her older brother was also a favorite of the emperor and couldn't be easily offended. Second, not only did the emperor not take back her title of Minister of Agriculture, he also had the empress bestow gifts to appease her. Third, the 9th princess came to visit every day and didn't leave until dusk. It could be seen that she was very close to her. Fourth, the crown princess sent several carts of gifts to show how much she valued her. Although Yu Xiang left the marquis household, her situation couldn't be said to be down and out. It was just that she missed Yu Pinyin very much in the dead of night. Yu Xiu came to visit her several times and said that the old lady was too sick to leave the field. Yu Xiang immediately prepared gifts and went to visit, but was stopped at the gate and couldn't enter. She could only leave in a sorry state. She could already walk like a normal person, but she was still in a wheelchair. She didn't know if it was because she was lazy or something else. 3 months passed like this. On this day, Yu Xiang had just laid down when she fell into a strange dream. She was standing by a muddy river with torrential waves. Not far away, she could hear the sounds of weapons clashing and the desperate sounds of killing. She looked up and saw the gray sky. There was moist water vapor entering her nostrils and a sudden rainstorm. She walked forward in the heavy rain. After a few steps, she saw several steeds galloping towards her, followed by many soldiers wielding scimitars. She wiped the raindrops off her face and stood on her tiptoes to look at the face of the person in the lead. She saw that the person had been shot in the back and had fallen from his horse into the long muddy river. The soldiers following him mournfully shouted, "Commander-in-Chief," and jumped down one after another, doing their best to paddle towards the floating figure. The cavalry on the shore put away their scimitars and pulled back their bowstrings. The arrows were even denser than the raindrops in the sky, making it impossible for people to escape. Yu Xiang suppressed the horror in her heart and rushed to the riverside to look at the familiar figure. Seeing him slowly sinking, she finally woke up from the boundless fear and helplessness. She reached out and touched her forehead. Her forehead was already covered with cold sweat, and her back and chest were torn apart. Yu Xiang gasped for breath and shouted for Tao Hong and Lu Lu. "Miss, what happened to you?" Lu Lu stared at her pale face and asked in shock. Chapter 118. At this time the moon was already in the middle of the sky. The evening breeze of early summer blew gently through the window, bringing with it a bit of coolness. The croaking of frogs was noisy and chaotic. Yu Xiang took out the medicine box that Dr. Piao had given her. She poured out all the medicine bottles on the unfolded package and rolled it up to take it away. "Miss, it's already past 3 in the morning. The city gate is already closed. Where can you go? Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Lulu hurriedly grabbed the package. "Miss, everything is fine. Why do you want to leave? Did you dream that Master Ho was in danger?" Tao Hong asked as he packed up the clothes. Yu Xiang poured herself a cup of hot tea with trembling hands. After drinking it in one gulp, she finally calmed down a bit. She said in a hoarse voice, "I dreamed that brother was hit by a stray arrow and fell into a surging river. He disappeared without a trace. There were also many pursuers on the riverbank shooting arrows at him." Other people's dreams were all illusory, but her master's dreams were real and foreseen. Tao Hong and Lulu sucked in a breath of cold air. They finally understood why she wanted to leave the city in the middle of the night. Based on past experience, this should not have happened yet. If she could tell Master Ho earlier, he would be more vigilant. But miss, you can send someone to deliver a letter to Master Ho. Why do you have to go in person? Xizang is filled with the flames of war and bandits and barbarians are everywhere. It's not a place where ordinary people can go. Lulu dissuaded her in a low voice. I have to deliver the letter and I have to go. If I don't see brother in person, I won't be at ease. Yuxiang firmly waved her hand. But young master won't agree. Tao Hong cautiously said. Yuxiang was silent for a moment. After a while she replied, I don't need his consent. Tomorrow I'll say that my feet hurt and go to Zhanggua Temple to seek medical treatment. Then I'll take the opportunity to stay at Zhanggua Temple. All the great monks of the Zhanggua Temple are skilled in martial arts. I, Master Kuhai, only need to borrow a few monks to be my bodyguards. Shen Yuanqi would never agree to let her go to Xizang. She was a girl, even if she hired guards to accompany her, it was not 100% safe. Unlike the monks of the Zhanggua Temple, they would be safe and sound. The most important thing now was to convince Master Kuhai. Yuxiang made up his mind and lay back on the bed. However, he couldn't fall asleep for the entire night. The next morning, she pretended that her feet hurt and asked Shen Yuanqi to send her up the mountain to seek medical treatment. The disease was deep in her bones. Ku Hui would not be able to find any clues in such a short time. Seeing that she wanted to stay at Zhanggua Temple, he agreed. Shen Yuanqi had official business to attend to, so he couldn't delay. He pulled his sister along and exhorted her before reluctantly going down the mountain. After he left, Yuxiang immediately went to see Master Kuhai. The two of them talked in secret in the meditation room for a long time. Kuhai was really no match for Yuxiang's sharp tongue. He said that as long as she drew the best lot, he would personally take her to Xizang. Yuxiang's heart was beating like a drum. He knelt and prayed in front of the lot pot for almost an hour before it started to spin. Then, he actually drew the lot king again. Kuhai's eyes widened to the size of a copper bell. He took the lot king and examined it over and over again. He also picked up the rest of the bamboo sticks and examined them one by one. He was afraid that someone had tampered with the lot pot and replaced 70 to 80% of the thin sticks with the lot king. Who in the world could hit the jackpot 3 times in a row when the odds were 1 in a billion? Yuxiang was indeed favored by the heavens. Monks do not lie. Kuhai had no choice but to pack up and lead a few monks who were highly skilled in martial arts to see her off. Yuxiang recalled the scene of her older brother's body being hit by an arrow. She tried every possible way to trick Ku Hui into going with her. Kuhai had always liked to wander the world. His face and the Zhanggua Temple's monks' robes were the best guides. Yuxiang and her 2 maidservants disguised themselves as ordinary lay disciples and mixed in with a group of monks, so they didn't stand out. Before she left, she wrote a letter to Shen Yuanqi, explaining the whole story. She also wanted to write a letter to the matriarch, but she had misgivings that she was old and couldn't bear the shock. She had no choice but to give up. 5 days after Yuxiang left, a young novice monk came to the Shun residence with a letter. After Shen Yuanqi finished reading the letter, he was so angry that his whole body trembled. Only now did he understand the extent of his younger sister's love for Yu Pinyin. If she didn't love him more than her life, how could she be willing to disregard her own safety and travel to Xizang because of an inexplicable dream? Her courage was 100 times greater than that of Yu Miaoqi. Ridiculous, it's just a dream. Shen Yuanqi refused to believe everything his younger sister said. How could anyone foresee the future from a dream? It must be because she missed him so much that she fell ill and became crazy. After being angry for a while, he immediately sent people to chase after her. However, she had already been gone for 5 days. Moreover, she was riding at top speed. It was already too late to chase after her. In Prefecture Yu, the matriarch had been seriously ill ever since Yuxiang left. Despite her illness, she still insisted on arranging Yuxiyu's marriage. Every time Yuxiang came to visit, he was driven away by her and said many heartless words. Mama Ma brewed the medicine and helped her master drink it slowly. Seeing that she was getting older and older, she couldn't help but advise, the old lady, just let Master Ho and Miss be together. After all, they aren't biological siblings. They grew up together and have a deep friendship. Shut up. The matriarch smashed the empty bowl. She coughed and spoke with difficulty. It's precisely because they grew up together that they can't be together. So what if they aren't biological siblings? In the eyes of outsiders, they used to be biological siblings. This point can't be erased. There are so many people in the capital. Just a mouthful of saliva from each of them would be enough to drown our Yongla Marquis Manor. Others can say whatever they want. Our Marquis Yongla doesn't have much of a reputation to speak of. We don't need that bit of dirty water. Mama Ma was worried and spoke the truth. Seeing her master's fierce glare, she hurriedly covered her mouth and lowered her head. For a while, there was only the sound of Wan Qiu clearing away the broken bowls in the room. Clang clang. Each sound was more annoying than the last. After Wan Qiu left, Mama Ma thought left and right. She braced herself and said, "The old lady, could it be that you've forgotten? Master Kuhai once said that Master Ho has the appearance of dying young, and Miss Xianger is his Tai benefactor. She can help him change his fate. The two of them together are a match made in heaven. Everyone will be happy. Now that you've driven Miss Xianger out, won't you hinder Master Ho's fate? Master Ho is currently fighting for his life on the battlefield in Shijiang." Speaking up to this point, she stopped before going too far. The matriarch didn't think much of it at first, but when she heard the last part, she shuddered. These past few years, the Marquis household had prospered day by day, and her grandson was also safe and sound. She gradually forgot about Kuhai's comments. Now that Mama Ma mentioned it, it was as if a bolt of lightning struck her head, splitting her soul into pieces. However, she had experienced many storms and waves, so she was able to stay calm. She clenched her teeth and waved her hand. No, Yandere has been fine for so many years. That calamity must have passed. How can there be a reason for biological siblings to become husband and wife? I will never agree. As soon as she thought about her grandson and granddaughter becoming husband and wife, she felt as if there was a fishbone stuck in her throat. She felt nauseous. In the end, she couldn't pass the barrier of morality and ethics. As for the matter of fate, no one could be sure about that illusory thing. What if Kuhai made a mistake? Mama Ma saw her close her eyes and begin to recite scriptures. Knowing that she had made up her mind, she could only withdraw. Yu Xiang traveled day and night, and it only took her a month to reach Shijiang. Before she even stepped into Ulan Chabu's territory, she heard that the Han army was defeated and lost 2 cities in a row. The Han army's commander-in-chief, Yu Pinyin, was shot dead by the second prince of Shi, Shigambala, and his body fell into the Wu River without a trace. Baptized by the sympathetic eyes of a group of monks, Yu Xiang's mind went blank for a moment. Her hand loosened and the teacup fell. Tao Hong and Lulu quickly leaned over to help her wipe the hot tea. As they wiped, their eyes turned red, and they clenched their teeth to hold back their sobs. "Why are you crying? Brother is not dead, why are you crying? Quickly put away your tears." Yu Xiang slowly clenched her fists and said resolutely, "Kuhai, aren't you the best at fortune-telling? Help me calculate my brother's fortune." Ba. Benefactor Yu is blessed, and will certainly be able to turn misfortune into blessing. Good, well said. You are worthy of being Master Kuhai, who can predict things like a god. My brother must be fine. Quickly pack up and set off. Let's go to the Kushui forest. She lifted the package, and the light blue cloth was immediately stained with a few drops of blood. She had scratched her palm. Kuhui asked puzzledly, "What are we going to do in the Kushui forest?" The Kushui forest was located in the upper reaches of the Wu River. It was an endless primeval forest. Walking in was like walking into a maze. There were also fierce beasts lurking in the dark, waiting for an opportunity to move. Even the Shi people, who lived on raw meat all year round, did not dare to easily set foot in it. It could be said to be a death zone. "To find my brother," Yu Xiang replied without turning her head. There was a voice in her heart guiding her in that direction. "Since benefactor you fell into the Wu River, you should go downstream to find him. How can you go upstream? Although there are many Shi tribes on the downstream coast, they won't kill the monks of the Zhenghua temple. You only need to shave your hair and wear a kasaya. You should be able to come and go freely." Ku Hui reminded her. Yu Xiang turned to look at him and seriously replied, "I'm not reluctant to part with my black hair, nor am I afraid of being hunted down by the Shi people. I just firmly believe that my brother is in the Kushui forest and is still alive. That feeling is like the guidance of Buddha from the underworld. Can you understand? When it came to Buddha, Ku Hui's face became solemn and he sincerely prayed. The rest of the monks also had nothing to say. Wherever Yu Xiang pointed, they would go, very obedient. On this day they stayed in a border town. Not far away was the dark Kushui forest, like a fierce beast with its mouth wide open to swallow all the people who set foot in it. However, these people did not include the monks of the Zhonggua temple, especially Ku Hai and Ku Hui. Both of them liked to wander. They had crossed oceans, crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and covered the entire continent. Their ability to survive in the wild was second to none. A place like the Kushui forest was extremely dangerous for others, but for them it only took them 10 days to half a month to explore it. The two prepared a compass, dry food, medicine, daggers, and other things. They also explained a lot of survival skills to Yu Xiang before returning to their room to rest. Chapter 119. The Marquis household was in a mess. There was no respect on the faces of the officers and soldiers. Instead, there was a faint murderous aura as they rushed towards a place. Yu Xiang followed behind the crowd. Just as she bypassed a pavilion, she saw her brother's study. She saw a dragon-scale guard come out with an inconspicuous box and shouted, "The guilty minister Yu Pinyin colluded with the Western barbarians to usurp the throne. Now there is conclusive evidence. Men, arrest all of them." Colluded with the Western barbarians to usurp the throne? Wait, what's going on here? Her brother was clearly shot into the river by the Western barbarians. His life and death are unknown. How did he become a guilty minister? And where did you find the evidence? If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. Yu Xiang rushed forward, wanting to snatch the wooden box. When her fingers touched the dragon-scale guard, everything in front of her instantly turned into smoke and dissipated in the air. The smoke drifted, scattered, and gathered, condensing into another mansion. It was the magnificent Crown Prince mansion. The mansion was also in a mess. Many dragon-scale guards surrounded the Crown Prince's study. After a while, the Crown Prince came out with a miserable face. 2 dragon-scale guards pointed their halberds at his back. Then another person came out. It was the deputy commander of the Dragon-Scale Guard, Ao Ping, her brother's most capable subordinate. He held a dragon robe and announced loudly, "The Crown Prince privately made a dragon robe intending to rebel. Immediately take him to the prison to await trial." A group of Dragon-Scale Guards swarmed up and took away everyone in the mansion. Yu Xiang stood in the same place and watched all this with a stunned expression. She only felt that her hands and feet were cold and her soul was torn apart. She desperately told herself that this was just a dream, but fear spread from the bottom of her heart until she was swallowed up. With a foul breath in her throat, Yu Xiang struggled to wake up from the dream. Tao Hong and Lulu also woke up. "Miss, what's wrong? Did you have nightmares again?" The two of them looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy. "I dreamed that the Marquis household was raided. The crime was colluding with Shi to usurp the throne. The Crown Prince mansion actually hid a dragon robe. Many dragon-scale guards wantonly arrested people. I am afraid that even cats and dogs would not be spared." Before she could finish, Lulu covered her mouth and asked in a low voice, "Miss, what should we do? Turn around and go back?" "No, you can't go back." Yu Xiang pulled her hand away and refused without hesitation. Her brother was waiting for her not far away. She couldn't leave her brother to die. "What about the Marquis household and the Crown Prince mansion?" Lulu asked with a pale face. Tao Hong was scared out of his wits. He hugged the quilt and shivered. In just 1.5 months she felt as if the sky had collapsed. "Write a letter, then buy a fast horse and ask the monk to send it back. The Marquis household is fine. Once you say that the old lady will write a letter, what about the Crown Prince? You can't say that you had a dream, right? The imperial family is suspicious. Even if this matter is resolved, it's hard to guarantee that they won't treat you as an evildoer," Lulu said worriedly. Tao Hong jumped out of bed and rummaged through the package. He was dismayed to find that they didn't bring a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. At this time it was the middle of the night, and there was no place to buy it. In the corner of the room there was a broom. Yu Xiang broke the branches on the broom and burned them with a candle. She then tore her underwear and laid it on the table. While writing, she explained, "I am an evildoer when I dream, and Master Kuhai's dream is a warning from heaven. Don't forget, he is the great Han divine monk. A casual Buddhist verse can cause countless people to kneel down and worship. This matter is urgent, so I will borrow his name. When this matter is over, I will definitely kneel in front of the temple and beg for his forgiveness." It wasn't that Yu Xiang didn't think of using obscure words to hint the crown prince to be more vigilant. However, her words carried little weight, and the crown prince probably wouldn't listen. Moreover, in her dream she saw Ao Ping participate in this matter. Ao Ping was highly valued by the crown prince and Emperor Chong Kong. If she didn't expose Ao Ping's true colors, even if they avoided this disaster, the defenseless crown prince would still fall into his trap. Therefore, there couldn't be the slightest ambiguity in the letter. If she wanted to say something, she had to say it clearly and clearly. "You plan to use Master Kuhai's name? This is a good idea." Lulu breathed a sigh of relief. Yu Xiang wrote while burning the branches. After half an hour she wrote 3 letters. She rolled them into thin strips and hid them in the seam of the package. Because there were many people in the Crown Prince mansion, she was afraid that the letter would be stolen halfway. Also, because the matriarch had cut off all contact with her, she was afraid that she would burn the letter without even reading it. She could only ask the monk to give all 3 letters to Shen Yuanqi and let him pass the message. She and Shen Yuanqi had already agreed in the letter that they would never reveal her dream in front of the crown prince. With Shen Yuanqi's help, the Marquis household should be able to avoid this disaster. Early in the morning, Yu Xiang asked Lulu to buy a fast horse. She handed the package to the thinnest monk and let him take it back to the capital. Without hesitation, he marched into the boundless expanse of the forest. Ever since Mama Ma's advice, the matriarch had been living in anxiety. Several times she walked to the door with the help of her crutches, stood there for a moment and then turned back. In the end, she couldn't cross the hurdle in her heart. On this day, 2 fast horses rushed into the capital one after the other. One of them went to the imperial city, and the other one, which arrived 2 hours later, went straight to the Shun residence. Shen Yuanqi was on break. When he heard that the visitor was a monk from the Zhangguo temple, he hurriedly invited him in. That monk handed the package to Shen Yuanqi, touched the seam suggestively, and then took his leave. Shen Yuanqi couldn't wait to open the thread. He took out the 3 letters and read them one by one. His expression changed from anxiety to disbelief, and then to fear. Without waiting for him to return to his senses, the housekeeper quickly ran in and whispered the news of General Yu's death in the Wu River. It turned out that the first fast horse was an urgent report from Shijiang, bringing this bad news. Death in the Wu River. This scene was exactly the same as described in his younger sister's letter. At that time, his younger sister was in the capital, and the incident hadn't happened yet. Could it be that there really was someone in the world who could foresee the future? Or was it a warning from the heavens? Then the dream about the Crown Prince mansion and the Marquis Yongla being searched couldn't be disbelieved. Shen Yuanqi threw his letter into the brazier and burned it, then took the other 2 out of the door. Because of the importance of this matter, he couldn't delay. He first went to the Crown Prince mansion to ask for an audience. The Crown Prince and he had a close personal relationship. The 2 often got together, so they didn't attract much attention. When Shen Yuanqi asked for an audience, the Crown Prince had just returned from the palace. The 2 sat down in the study. The Crown Prince received Shen Yuanqi's hint and sent all the servants away. He asked in a low voice, "You came for Yifeng? But is Xiang worried? I have already asked Father Emperor to issue an imperial edict, ordering the army of Shijiang to search for Yifeng with all their strength. He is a valiant general who has never been defeated in 100 battles. He won't die in the hands of insignificant Shi people." Shen Yuanqi silently nodded. His fingertips were hidden in his sleeve, and he repeatedly stroked the letter. Finally, he took it out and said, "This humble one indeed came for Commander Yu, but not only for him. This matter is mysterious. I asked the Crown Prince to take a look. In the letter, Yu Xiang described the 3 dreams in detail, and then pushed all of them to Master Kuhai. He said that he had rushed to Shijiang with the mentality of, better believe it than not. On the way, he discovered that the dreams had come true. After thinking about it repeatedly, he decided to tell the Crown Prince the truth, so that the Crown Prince could be more vigilant. After reading it, the Crown Prince was silent for a long time. Ao Ping led the Dragon Scale Guard to search the Crown Prince mansion. The imperial robe was secretly hidden in the Crown Prince mansion. The evidence of treason was found in Yifeng's study. Each of these incidents was simply too unbelievable, but they also seemed so real. Shen Yuanqi saw the Crown Prince's expression become gloomy. Just as he was about to open his mouth to comfort him, he saw the Crown Prince suddenly stand up. Ignoring the presence of outsiders, he opened the secret door behind the bookcase and rummaged through many of his private items. The Crown Prince's breathing was very heavy, like an injured beast that had no choice but to flee with all its might. After a short while, that heavy breathing suddenly stopped, and his rummaging movements also abruptly stopped. He slowly turned around, holding a brocade box in his hand. The lid of the box had already been opened, and a dazzling golden light flickered inside. It was precisely the bright yellow color that belonged to the imperial robe. Shen Yuanqi was dumbstruck, and it took him a long time to recover his senses. Good, when Yifeng was in this mansion, even a fly couldn't enter. Once Yifeng left, even such a dangerous thing unexpectedly entered this prince's study. The person behind this is truly remarkable. The Crown Prince sneered, a murderous aura faintly floating in his pitch-black eyes. He muttered to himself for a moment, then continued, Yifeng's marquis household is strictly controlled, no less than the Crown Prince mansion. The person behind this was actually able to put these things in this prince's in his study. It can be seen that he has already bribed the most trusted people by our side. Once these words were spoken, he completely believed in the 3 dreams. Crown Prince, how should we deal with this item now? Shen Yuanqi's face was calm and composed, but his heart was secretly laughing bitterly. For the sake of his sister, he had no choice but to wade into this pool of muddy water. How to deal with it? Naturally, hand it over to Fu Huang. As for family use side, don't report it. This prince wants to see what the person behind this actually wants to do. The Crown Prince closed the lid of the box and laughed coldly. What a good, the innocent knows they are innocent, and the muddy knows they are muddy. Rushing to secretly report to the emperor before the person behind the scenes makes a move. Moving from being in the open to being in the dark, from being a prey to a hunter. Only the Crown Prince, who was deeply trusted by the emperor, dared to act so openly. Shen Yuanqi was relieved and reminded, if that person makes a move, the marquis household's women and children will most likely be implicated. If it weren't for his sister repeatedly asking him to take care of the matriarch in UCU, he definitely wouldn't have spoken. The women and children will be even more fine. Lord Shun, you may not know, but in the past, the old Marquis Yongla once used Imperial Grandfather's death exemption golden medallion in exchange for the promise that the crime won't affect the women and children. When this matter blows up, the Marquis household's family members won't be implicated. When this prince and Imperial father uncovers the person behind the scenes, this prince will naturally clear Yifeng's name. The Crown Prince thought for a moment and added, this matter also won't implicate Xiang'er and Master Kuhai. This prince will only say that he caught a spy by his side, and was lucky to find out such a shocking secret. What letter, what dream, this prince has never heard of it. The search for Yifeng also won't stop because of this. This prince will pass on the message. If he is alive, I want to see him. If he is dead, I want to see his corpse. As for Xiang'er, this prince will send someone else to look for her. This prince won't reveal anything that will damage her reputation. With this prince's arrangement, does the Lord Shun feel relieved? If you have any concerns, please speak. The Crown Prince's arrangement was so thorough that Shen Yuanqi had nothing to say. He immediately got up and took his leave. The Crown Prince was anxious and didn't urge him to stay. As soon as he left, he jumped on a fast horse and galloped toward the Forbidden Palace. Marquis Yongluan, the matriarch, received the news that her grandson had died in Wu River. She had already fainted on the couch. As soon as she was woken up by Mama Ma, she began to bawl. It was I who harmed Yenner. If I had thought of his untimely death earlier, I definitely wouldn't have driven Xiang'er away. If I hadn't driven Xiang'er away, he wouldn't have met with this mishap. It's all my fault. As she cried, she beat her chest and stamped her feet. She pulled out the golden hairpin in her hair, and was about to cut it on her wrist when Mama Ma desperately grabbed her. Quickly go to the family shun and bring Miss 3 back. Quickly go. She urged Wan Qiu repeatedly. Finally, she whispered into the matriarch's ear, "The old lady, how is this your fault? Master Kuhai said that the fate of him and his sister are opposite. If they live under the same roof, only one of them can survive. Master Ho wasn't harmed by you. He was cursed by that lone star." Chapter 120. The servants of the Marquis household found the family shun and learned that Yu Xiang's leg injury had relapsed. He had been in the Zhengguo temple for more than a month. They immediately went up the mountain but were refused entry by the monks of the Zhengguo temple. They had no choice but to turn back. Not being able to bring Yu Xiang back, Matriarch Furen became more and more uneasy. She endured her illness and wanted to find him personally. As soon as she walked out of the door, she vomited blood and fainted. Subconsciously, she still had a glimmer of hope. She hoped that her grandson just fell into the Wu River and disappeared. As long as Yu Xiang came back, he would be safe and sound. Because of this obsession, even in a coma, she still kept chanting, "Go and find Xiang'er. Go and find Xiang'er." Mama Ma was afraid that her illness would worsen, so she pretended to send for a doctor. Wan Qiu and the others hurriedly carried her to the bed, and then brought hot water to wipe her cold body over and over again. The Marquis household was in complete chaos. Yu Xiu hurried to the main courtyard. On the way, she met Yu Miaoqi, who was sitting by the lotus pond and leisurely playing with the fish and admiring the flowers. Her eyes couldn't help but turn red. "We don't know whether Big Brother is dead or alive. Old Ancestor is seriously ill. How can you still be in the mood to play?" "Why wouldn't I be in the mood to play? They never treated me as a member of the family. Why should I care about them? Whether they are dead or alive, let them be. These flowers, fish and grass, you should stop and look at them a few more times. I'm afraid you won't have this blessing in the future." She covered her mouth and chuckled. Her eyes flashed with frightening malice. "What do you mean by this? What are you hinting at?" Yu Xiu was not as brainless as before. Especially when facing Yu Miaoqi, she used the most sinister guesses to guess her true intentions. "I'm not hinting at anything. Don't think too much. Go and see grandmother. She may not be able to make it." Yu Miaoqi giggled. "What nonsense are you talking about? Old Ancestor is very good. If your mouth isn't clean, I don't mind personally washing it for you." Yu Xiu had stayed in the countryside for more than half a year. She hadn't learned anything else, but she had learned the art of quarreling with village women. She quickly stepped forward, grabbed the back of Yu Miaoqi's neck, and pushed her head into the lotus pond. When their mistress brought Baosheng out, the Baosheng would be forced to be mute and sold. This matter had thoroughly chilled the hearts of the maidservants. As a result, Yu Miaoqi often had no one to serve her. At this time she was alone and there was no one to help her. Yu Xiu was accompanied by 2 older maidservants. The 2 younger maidservants rushed forward and held her hands and feet down, making her unable to move. "Tell me, who's about to die?" What did you mean by what you said just now? What do you mean you won't have such good fortune in the future? What have you done?" Every time Yu Miaoqi was about to choke to death, Yu Xiu would pull her out and whisper in her ear. If she didn't answer, she would press her back down and torture her over and over again. Yu Xiu was indeed Yu Pinyan's biological younger sister. Her methods of extorting confessions by torture were not inferior to her older brothers. Yu Miaoqi's stomach was filled with muddy water. She only felt that her lungs were about to explode. She regretted provoking Yu Xiu too much. She should have known that family Yu people, regardless of whether they were male or female, were all executioners. Confronting them head-on would definitely not end well. But that person still hadn't made a move, so she absolutely couldn't let go. Otherwise, all her efforts would be for naught. Yu Xiu couldn't really drown Yu Miaoqi. After tormenting her for several minutes, she saw that Yu Miaoqi had already fainted. Only then did she release her bruised neck. She waved her hand and said, "Let's go. Let's go see old ancestor." She actually threw the dying Yu Miaoqi to the side of the road. When they arrived at the main courtyard, the matriarch was already awake. Her forehead was wrapped in a square handkerchief, and her eyes were filled with tears. Yu Xiu comforted her with a few words and truthfully told her what Yu Miaoqi had said. She asked, "Old ancestor, what do you think she means? No good fortune? Could it be that we can't live in this Marquillongla anymore? Does she know something?" The matriarch was greatly alarmed. She immediately spat out another mouthful of blood. Imperial Palace, Yangxin Palace Hall. Emperor Chong Kang's imperial robe was placed on top of his desk. Today's weather was clear. The already brilliant sunlight illuminated the imperial robe until it seemed like it was about to ignite. The bright yellow flame set off Emperor Chong Kang's face even more gloomy and frightening. They even managed to create an imperial robe and secretly send it to the Crown Prince mansion. What a good method. He praised, but his eyes were filled with murderous intent. No matter who the person behind this was, the power they secretly controlled had already crossed the bottom line that he couldn't tolerate. The Crown Prince remained silent. He understood that not saying anything at this time was the correct choice. Because if he didn't say anything, Imperial Father would naturally fill in everything he could or couldn't think of. In this way, it would appear that this person had committed an extremely heinous crime. 10,000 deaths would be a light punishment. They also placed something in Yifeng's study? What was it? Emperor Chong Kang's tone was cold. Sun doesn't know. Sun only asked a few questions before he bit his tongue and committed suicide. Sun didn't do a good job. Imperial Father, please punish me. The Crown Prince bowed his head, his face full of shame. It wasn't difficult to make a corpse that bit his tongue to commit suicide. This matter had already been done before the Crown Prince entered the palace. Moreover, it didn't alert the person hiding in the dark. No matter. Emperor Chong Kong waved his hand. Someone will naturally report this matter to the imperial court. Go back. Take this imperial robe and put it back where it was. In the next few months, we father and son will have to put on a big show. The Crown Prince understood tacitly and secretly left the palace with the imperial robe. As soon as he left, Ao Ping led a scarred dragon scale guard into the palace to seek an audience. Emperor Chong Kong summoned him to the imperial court. It was Fu Fanqing, who often followed by Yu Pinyan's side. He could also be considered one of Yu Pinyan's trusted aides. Fu Fanqing knelt down with a thud and said, "Reporting to your majesty, Commandant Yu colluded with the enemy and committed treason, intending to rebel." He described in detail how he accidentally discovered a clue, and how he avoided being hunted down to report this matter to the imperial court. The entire process was extremely dangerous. Emperor Chong Kong sat on the throne without saying a word. His face was expressionless. The hall was deathly silent. When Ao Ping and Fu Fanqing were about to collapse, Emperor Chong Kong slowly opened his mouth. "Ao Ping, take people to thoroughly investigate Marquillongla. If there are any abnormalities, immediately report to me." Ao Ping pretended to hesitate. When Emperor Chong Kang's cold gaze swept over him, he bowed and left with Fu Fanqing. Emperor Chong Kong sent all the palace servants away, leaving only his most trusted eunuch behind. Only then did he take out a handkerchief to cover his mouth and cough. After coughing, he opened it and saw that the bright yellow cloth was stained with crimson blood. As it turned out, Emperor Chong Kang's illness had already reached its terminal stage and he didn't have much time left. That was why he boldly and decisively reformed the court, eliminated the aristocratic families, and supported the young talents to pave the way for the Crown Prince's ascension to the throne. Only a few eunuchs, imperial physicians, and a few other people knew about this. Even the Crown Prince and the Empress were kept in the dark. Emperor Chong Kong felt that his illness was getting worse. Since the beginning of the year, he had frequently handed over government affairs to the Crown Prince. He even gave half of the memorials to the Crown Prince to review. Although the Crown Prince was currently the heir apparent, he already had one foot on the throne. The mastermind probably couldn't wait any longer. Emperor Chong Kong sized up the eunuch with a cold gaze. The eunuch was so shocked that he dropped the medicine bottle he had just taken out from his sleeve and knelt down to state his loyalty. Get up. You grew up with me. I believe in you. Emperor Chongkong muttered. If they didn't know about my illness, the mastermind wouldn't be so anxious and use so many hidden pawns and connections to set up such a murderous trap. Old fourth, old fifth, old sixth. Who was it that concealed themselves so deeply that they even schemed against my trusted aide and the crown prince? Emperor Chongkong closed his eyes and thought for a moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with murderous intent. Send someone to investigate Imperial Physician Su. Remember, don't alarm him. Just keep an eye on him. A dragon scale guard suddenly appeared in the hall. His official robe wasn't the usual crimson but black. He cupped his hands and accepted the order. It was as if he had suddenly appeared and then disappeared. The eunuch knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily. He understood that although Emperor Chongkong said he believed him, his heart was already filled with murderous intent. Anyone who knew about his illness wouldn't be able to live after this matter. The matriarch spat out a mouthful of blood. She didn't want Mama Ma to call for a doctor. She repeatedly shouted, "Go open the Yandere's door and search all the rooms, especially the study. Go quickly." Her grandson had suffered a defeat. The imperial censor would certainly impeach him without restraint. However, he could be considered to have died heroically for the country. The emperor would only take into account the fact that the Marquis household was a family with 3 martyrs. At this time, if anyone wanted to completely overthrow the Marquis household, they would certainly fabricate a groundless accusation to frame her grandson. Since it was a framing, there would certainly be evidence. Where was the evidence? How did it get in? Connecting the dots with Yu Miaoqi's words, the matriarch suddenly felt as if she had been enlightened. Yu Pinyin controlled the Marquis household like a military camp. Even if the household lacked people, they would never buy them from human traffickers. The people they hired were all the children of the household. If a servant who had committed a crime was driven out, the entire family would be sold without any leeway. Even if Yu Miaoqi broke the rules when he was in charge of the household, the Marquis household seemed to be in a mess, but no one could take advantage of the loopholes. As for the poisonous dates incident, it could only be said that Yu Miaoqi's greed had reached a certain level. Even Yu Pinyin couldn't control him. Every time Yu Pinyin went to war, he would instruct the matriarch to seal his courtyard and study. He would also send people to check the seals every day. If there was even the slightest abnormality, they would immediately investigate thoroughly. In this way, the Marquis household was under his control like an iron chain. The Jingfu courtyard where Yu Xiang lived was only a wall away from his study. For convenience, there was a side door that was never locked. Yu Miaoqi told the matriarch about her grandson and granddaughter. He also told her to marry off her granddaughter as soon as possible. Then, Shen Yuanqi came to acknowledge his family. He also caused her and her granddaughter to make a big fuss in the Jingfu courtyard. Even the imperial bodyguards and servants were alarmed. When everyone was trying to persuade her and her granddaughter, where was Yu Miaoqi? Did he open the side door and sneak into her grandson's study? The more the matriarch thought about it, the more frightened she became. She used her cane to get out of bed. However, she woke up too late. Before she could leave the room, she heard a loud noise outside. Someone shouted, "Not good. The dragon scale guards are here to arrest people. Quickly go find the old lady." The matriarch hurriedly ran to the door of her grandson's study. She saw Ao Ping surrounded by a group of dragon scale guards, coming out of the door. He held a small box full of letters in his hands and shouted, "The guilty official Yu Pinyin colluded with the people of Western Yi to usurp the throne. Now there is conclusive evidence. Men, arrest all of them." The dragon scale guards responded in unison. They tied the hands of all the servants behind their backs and took them away one by one. The matriarch was a first-ranked noble lady, so she was given some face. 2 imperial bodyguards pressed a knife against her back and escorted her to the ox cart. Yu Xiu and Yu Miaoqi were also brought over. One was anxious and at a loss. The other was expressionless, but her eyes flashed with joy. This Marquis Yongla was finally destroyed by her. She was really happy. Even if fate had changed, some things were still surprisingly similar. In her previous life, Yu Miaoqi was already the 4th prince's wife, but she still used the same method to destroy Marquis Yongle. It was only because after Yu Pinyin gained power, Emperor Chongkong wanted to take the crown prince, who was guarding the imperial mausoleum, back to the capital. Emperor Chongkong had always doted on the crown prince. If not for the mandate of heaven, he would never send the crown prince out of the capital. As soon as Yu Pinyin handed over the memorial, Emperor Chongkong readily agreed. The crown prince had Yu Pinyin's support behind him, and Emperor Chongkang's favor. It was only a matter of time before he ascended the throne. Thus, for the sake of the fourth prince's great cause, and for her own bright future, Yu Miaoqi finally made a move against Marquis Yongle. Chapter 121. Those letters were quickly sent to Emperor Chongkang's desk. The letter recorded that Yu Pinyin and Western Yi's second prince had conspired to exchange 2 cities for high-quality warhorses and elite weapons. These warhorses and weapons were to be used to force the crown prince to abdicate. Yu Pinyin's defeat meant that he lost 2 cities, and they were Ulanchabu and Fengxing cities that were agreed upon in the letter. Even if Yu Pinyin was being hunted down by Western Yi's second prince, it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. If the letter was leaked, people could still say that he had tried to scheme against a tiger but failed. In short, he was no longer here. Dead men tell no tales, and they could splash any dirty water on his head. The real traitor was manipulating everything behind the scenes. Not only did he infiltrate the Dragonscale Guard, the Imperial Academy of Medicine, the Imperial Palace and Marquis Yongle, he even had connections in the army. Otherwise, with Yu Pinyin's bravery, he would not have been so easily defeated by the second prince. After Emperor Chongkong finished reading the secret letter, his face was unusually ugly, and the murderous aura around him seemed to be substantial. Ao Ping thought that he had succeeded, so he buried his head and waited for the next order. After a long silence, Emperor Chongkong waved his hand and said, "Take people to search the Crown Prince mansion. Except for the Crown Prince and the young imperial grandson, if anyone else resists, kill them." Ao Ping bowed and accepted the order. Emperor Chongkong had to admit that the ability of the person behind the scenes was not below that of the Crown Prince, and possibly even above him. But so what? This person could betray the interests of the country for his own selfish desires. The more outstanding he was, the more Emperor Chongkong wanted to kill him. Not to mention the changes in the capital far away in Xizjiang, Yu Pinyin was experiencing the biggest disaster in his life. He was shot in the back, but because the arrowhead was stuck in his bones, it fortunately did not hurt his heart. However, he had been soaked in the cold river for a long time. After coming ashore, he had to run for his life for 5 days. If he did not pull out the arrowhead, he was afraid that the rust poison would enter his body and he would die from a high fever. However, the arrowhead was too close to the heart. If it was pierced too easily, it would injure the heart meridian and cause him to die from excessive blood loss. Unless he could escape as soon as possible and find a skilled doctor. Right now, Yu Pinyin and his 2 deputies were hiding in a cave to take a short rest. The lower reaches of the Wu River are the territory of the Western barbarians. If they go ashore, they will undoubtedly die. Therefore, Yu Pinyin desperately swam to the shore with the help of his 2 deputies and swam upstream. Along the way, it was not that they did not encounter any of the great Han Dynasty soldiers, but they all avoided them. This battle should not have been a big defeat, but Yu Pinyin's central army did not receive support from the right wing. The left wing arrived in time and joined forces with the Western barbarians to encircle and annihilate the central army. The central army was completely annihilated and suffered countless casualties. At this juncture, how could Yu Pinyin not guess that someone in the army had defected to the enemy? Therefore, he didn't trust anyone, and only brought the 2 surviving subordinates into the dense forest to avoid the search and rescue team. "General, you still have a fever," Left General Zhang Meng said worriedly. "I will boil some water for you to drink. Here is the leftover roast rabbit from yesterday. Wait for me to heat it up." Right General Lin Jia was drilling wood to make a fire. The fire extinguishers in their clothes were wet with water, so they could only use this ancient method. "Treat the wound on your leg, it is bleeding again." Yu Pinyin's face was flushed and his voice was hoarse. Lin Jie agreed, but he was still making a fire and did not move. Zhang Meng tore the hem of his battle robe and wrapped the wound on his leg. The three of them were silent for a while. They had been trekking in the open water forest for 5 days and 5 nights. The deeper they went, the more they lost their way. Now they could only resign themselves to fate. As a soldier, they did not die in the hands of the enemy, but were plotted against by their comrades. The pain and hatred of being betrayed was something that ordinary people could not understand. The arrow on Yu Pinyan's back had been cut off, leaving only a small part stuck in his shoulder blade. He couldn't lie down or sit down. Right now he was leaning against a rock. He took out a copper coin from his bosom and stared at it intently. If he died here, Shen Yuanqi would definitely take Xiang'er away and find a husband for her in a few years. His little sweetheart would be kissed, hugged, and even taken by another man. As long as he thought of the foreseeable future, his eyes were red and his mind was in a frenzy. He could not wait to raise his sword and destroy everything in sight. He deeply realized that he could not die here. Don't make a fire, let's go immediately. He carefully put away the copper coin and said resolutely, General, you have had a high fever for 3 consecutive days. Lie down and rest for a while. Lin Jie threw away the wood and went forward to stop him. What we lack most now is time. Only by walking out of the forest as soon as possible can we have a chance of survival. Let's go, there is no time to waste. He pushed Lin Jie away, picked up the bow and arrow on the ground and strode out. The two of them had no choice but to guard him as he walked into the endless forest. About an hour later, the birds in the forest suddenly scattered in all directions. Soon after, there was the crisp sound of branches being chopped off and the faint sound of people talking. Yu Pinyan quickly climbed up the treetops. Lin Jie and Zhang Meng also lurked in the dark. The three of them pulled the bowstrings in their hands, and their eyes were full of killing intent. I can feel that my brother is here, and he is getting closer and closer to me. He has a fever and his back is injured. We have to find him as soon as possible. Yu Xiang covered her burning forehead and said. Ku Hai and Ku Hui comforted her in a low voice. Tao Hong Lu was almost paralyzed with fatigue. Seeing his master rushing forward, he could only bite the bullet and follow. Yu Xiang pushed aside a cluster of bushes, and the feeling of good luck made her suddenly raise her head. Yu Pinyan aimed at a group of people under the cover of the leaves. The person in the lead was wearing a dirty monk's robe. His hair was tied up in a bun and firmly tied behind his head with a rope. There were many muddy spots on his face, covering his facial features. Only a pair of big and round almond-shaped eyes were shining with a determined light. Even though the person was unrecognizable, Yu Pinyan still recognized the pair of eyes that had appeared countless times in his dreams. He shouted in disbelief, Xiang'er, brother. Yu Xiang also raised her head, and her expression was ecstatic. Zhang Meng and Lin Jie, who were hibernating, released their bowstrings and walked out hesitantly. They knew that the general's most precious sister was called Yu Xiang, but they had never thought that the legendary arrogant and domineering daughter of a rich family would appear in such a sorry state in the dangerous forest. Brother, come down quickly. Yu Xiang waved her hands, shouted and jumped with a bright smile on her face, but tears kept flowing, washing the mud on her face into 2 grooves. She looked very funny. Yu Pinyan jumped down from the branch and strode over. He was very upset and scolded coldly. How can you come to Shijiang alone? Do you want to die? I didn't come alone. The eminent monks of Zhangguo Temple escorted me here. Look. Yu Xiang pointed behind her. Ku Hai and the others put their palms together and saluted. Zhang Meng and Lin Jie were overjoyed. The monks of Zhangguo Temple were famous for being good at trekking. They traveled by foot. Although the forest was vast and steep, it was not enough to stop them. This was really a blessing from heaven. The two hurried forward and saluted. Yu Pinyan, however, had no time to care about the masters. He grabbed the little girl who was about to jump into his arms and asked, Are you hurt? Why didn't you stay at home? I'm not hurt. I dreamed that you were hit by a stray arrow and fell into the water. That's why I went out to look for you. I don't have any other thoughts. I just want to die with you. Yu Xiang wiped her tears and added, But I know you must be fine. Can't we stop talking nonsense? You have a fever and you're injured. We need to find a place to treat your injuries quickly. Let's go. She carefully held her brother's arm, afraid of touching his wound. She wanted to pull him forward, but she had to control her strength. Yu Pinyin stared at her anxious face and finally smiled for the first time in days. Although Zhang Meng and Lin Jia were chatting with the masters, they were listening to the brother and sister's conversation. They came all the way to Shijiang to look for him just because of a dream, regardless of life and death. Their intentions were really too great. They finally understood why their commander doted on his arrogant sister so much. If their relatives were willing to sacrifice their lives for them, they would feel that no amount of love was enough. Kuhai led them to a cave. The cave was spacious and dry. Yu Xiang untied her brother's battle robe and saw the wounds on his body and the arrowheads on his back. Her big eyes were suddenly filled with tears. Tao Hong and Lulu took out a fire and made a fire. They boiled water in the alms bowls brought by the monks. Don't cry. Seeing you cry makes me feel worse than being shot by an arrow. Yu Pinyin wiped the tears and mud on her face with his fingertips. If Ku Hui wasn't checking the wounds, he would have held his sister in his arms and kissed her. I won't cry. Yu Xiang immediately wiped her tears with her sleeves, but because her clothes were too dirty, her white face became darker and darker. She looked like a lynx. Yu Pinyin couldn't help laughing. Zhang Meng and Lin Jia were helping Tao Hong and Lulu boil water. They were surprised to hear their commander laughing. Their commander had always been cold and emotionless. It was the first time they had seen such a tender and affectionate side of him. It was said that their commander loved his sister more than his life. It seemed that the rumors were true. However, Miss Three wasn't arrogant and domineering. She could step into danger for her brother without hesitation and risk her life twice for him. She had a lot of feelings for her brother. This pair of brother and sister had such deep feelings for each other, and their hearts were as close as could be. It was truly enviable. Yu Xiang glared at her brother and asked for some hot water from Tao Hong to wipe her face. Ku Hui examined the remaining half of the arrow and said slowly, Almsgiver you are indeed very lucky to have almost injured your heart meridian. I'll pull the arrow out for you. It might be very painful, so please be prepared. Wait, don't pull it out yet. Yu Xiang quickly stopped him. She took out a handkerchief from her bag, folded it into a strip, and stuffed it into her brother's mouth. Then she said, pull it out. Ku Hui nodded and was about to pull out the arrow when she stopped him. Wait. Benefactor Yu Xiang, if you have something to say, please say it all at once. I don't want my hand to slip. Ku Hui was helpless. I'm sorry. Yu Xiang apologized sincerely and suggested, you can count to 3 before pulling it out. It's so scary. Yu Pinyin couldn't help laughing. He spat out the handkerchief and said with a smile, as long as my little sapling is by my side, I have nothing to fear. Master Ku Hui, you can pull it out however you want. I can take it. Chapter 122. Ku Hui began to count as instructed. Yu Xiang tightly held her brother's large hand. Every time she counted a number, she would gasp and tremble. Her eyes were wide open and her nose wrinkled. She looked like she was in 100 times more pain than an injured person. Not only did Yu Pinyin find it funny, but even Master Ku Hui couldn't help but laugh. He secretly sighed at the two's sincere feelings. Wait, stop counting. This time, it was Yu Pinyin himself who called for them to stop. He pulled his trembling sister into his arms and hugged her tightly. Then, he covered her bright eyes with his large hand and ordered in a deep voice, pull it out. As soon as his voice fell, Ku Hui decisively pulled out the arrowhead and used a silver needle to stop the bleeding. There were signs of ulceration around the wound. He had no choice but to burn the dagger red to remove the rotten flesh bit by bit. However, Yu Pinyin didn't make a sound. Even his muscles were completely relaxed. Hugging his beloved baby that he thought about day and night, he didn't feel anything other than sweetness and joy. Yu Xiang pulled his hand away and looked up to observe his expression. She happened to meet his affectionate gaze and was momentarily stunned. The two looked at each other for a long time. Then, naturally, they hugged each other tightly. Ku Hui treated Yu Pinyin's wound as quickly as possible. Then, he turned to treat the two deputy generals. Tao Hong and Lulu came over with 2 bowls filled with hot water. They planned to wipe Master Ho's body. Let me do it. Yu Xiang snatched the handkerchief. Miss, you should rest. You have to apply bone ointment every day. Don't forget. Lulu said as she placed a long branch on the rock wall. Then she opened her bag and took out several monks' robes. She hung them on the branch as a curtain. After making sure that Ku Hui and the others couldn't see this scene from 5 meters away, she squatted down and took off her master's cloth shoes. Then she rolled up her master's trousers. Because of the long journey, Yu Xiang's knee bone hurt badly. If she didn't apply bone ointment every day, she definitely wouldn't have made it to Shijiang. In order not to burden her brother, she could only return the wet handkerchief to Tao Hong and ordered, "Be careful when you wipe it. Don't touch my brother's wound." Yu Pinyin moved over and stared at the medicine bottle in Lulu's hand. He asked what happened to Xianger, but his leg injury acted up again? Can you still walk? Young Mrs. Legs have just recovered, and she's already walking so much. It's inevitable that it'll be a burden on the newly grown bones. But don't worry, Master Ho. Master Ku Hui said that as long as you apply the bone-replenishing ointment for an hour every day, you'll be fine. Yu Pinyin was relieved. He took the medicine bottle from her hand and carefully applied the black medicine to his sister's slightly red and swollen kneecaps. His handsome face tightened because of the pain in his heart. After he finished applying the ointment, he saw Lulu wipe his sister's feet with a handkerchief. Then, he pushed her to the side and picked up his sister's small and delicate jade feet to examine them. His face became gloomier and gloomier. He still remembered how smooth and soft his sister's feet were before he left for war. Because she had never walked before, they were as delicate as a newborn baby's. But now, her feet were blistered one after another. Her heels even had calluses from walking for a long time. They looked very rough. Yu Xiang was stared at by his deep gaze for a long time. She felt a little uncomfortable. She shrunk her feet and asked in a small voice, "Are they ugly?" "No, they're not ugly at all." Yu Pinyin lowered his head and kissed her snow-white feet. He said firmly, "In the future, Big Brother will definitely not let you suffer the slightest bit." Why would they suffer? Yu Xiang was tickled by his hard beard stubble. She giggled and said, "As long as I can find you, I'm willing to climb a mountain of swords or dive into a sea of fire. You're still alive and I'm still alive. The two of us are safe and sound together. All the suffering isn't suffering." She leaned over and whispered in her brother's ear, "It's sweetness, it's happiness. Big Brother, I miss you so much." She hugged her brother's neck and pressed her lips against his dry and chapped lips. She licked them inch by inch with the tip of her tongue. Then she sighed with satisfaction. Her eyes slowly turned red. Yu Pinyin also stuck out the tip of his tongue and slowly hooked it with hers. His endless gentle movements told her his deep and heavy longing. Tao Hong and Lulu were used to this. One helped Master Ho wipe the bloodstains on his back, while the other helped Miss dry her feet. Zhang Meng and the others couldn't see the scene on the other side of the monk's robe. They could only hear the brother and sister whispering to each other. They sighed in their hearts, "With such a loving sister, if I were Master Ho, I'm afraid I would even give her my heart." No wonder Master Ho only doted on Miss 3 despite having 3 sisters. On the other side, Yu Pinyin really wanted to dig out his fiery heart for his sister to keep. After a tender kiss, he hugged his sister tightly in his arms. His arms tightened until he saw Lulu take out a silver needle. He reluctantly let go. "Let me do it." He took the silver needle and held up his sister's small and delicate feet. "This is an ointment. Apply it after you break the blisters. Put it on the fire and it'll be fine tomorrow morning." Lulu took out a medicine bottle from his bag. After Tao Hong finished wiping Master Ho's back, he took off his robe and put it on Master Ho's shoulders. He went outside and picked up a few sparks to start a fire. If the blisters on her feet weren't broken and dried in time, they would rot after a long time. She might not even be able to walk. Yu Pinyin carefully broke the blisters and asked if it hurt from time to time. Yu Xiang kept shaking her head. She held her cheeks and looked greedily at her brother. It was so good to finally find her brother. Even if Xizang was full of danger and war, as long as she could be with her brother, her life was like heaven. Yu Pinyin looked up and saw his sister's charming and cute smile. Her eyes even showed a bit of infatuation, so he also smiled. After dealing with the blisters, he also took off his boots and put them by the fire to dry. Yu Xiang moved to his side and held his big hand with her small hand. Their fingers intertwined, and her small feet rubbed against his big feet. She sighed contentedly. Yu Pinyin directly put her on his lap and pressed her little head into his arms. He wrapped his arms tightly around her slender waist and whispered, "You've lost weight." Returning to the familiar and warm embrace, Yu Xiang didn't even want to say anything. She just hummed in a low voice. Outside, Tao Hong and Lulu took out dry food, broke it up, and threw it into the boiling water to cook a pot of porridge for everyone. Zhang Meng and Lin Jia hadn't eaten a full meal for a long time. They drank a lot and were very satisfied. "Master Ho, miss, eat something to warm yourself up." Tao Hong and Lulu each carried a bowl of porridge in. Yu Xiang touched her brother's forehead and found that his fever had subsided. She immediately smiled and got down from his lap. She took the porridge and slowly blew it to cool it down. Yu Pinyin was not afraid of the heat. He finished the porridge in 2 or 3 mouthfuls. Then he smiled and looked at his sister, who was licking the porridge like a cat. The dry rations were made from buckwheat that had been fried until it was golden yellow. After it was boiled, the porridge carried a charred fragrance, and the texture was extremely thick and soft. It was simply even more delicious than the jade stem porridge that was meticulously cooked by the Marquis Estate's chef. Of course, Yu Xiang knew that this was just an illusion, so she whispered with a smile, "People say that love fills one's stomach. Now I finally understand the meaning of this sentence. After my brother left, I felt that the dragon liver and phoenix marrow were tasteless. Now that I'm with my brother, I feel that eating grains is also a kind of enjoyment." Yu Pinyin smiled and lowered his head to peck the tip of her nose. He felt that it was not enough, so he pinched her chin and sucked her lips. He shared the last mouthful of porridge and sighed, "It's really delicious." Yu Xiang proudly threw a charming look at him and returned the bowl of porridge to Lulu. She plunged into her brother's arms and rubbed her head against him. Yu Pinyin ran his fingers through her hair and gently combed through it. His deep eyes were filled with love that was about to burst out of his heart. She relied on him and he also relied on her. They were each other's spiritual support. Yu Pinyin noticed that his sister had stopped moving and her breathing had become shallow and long. He looked down and found that she had fallen asleep. Her eyebrows were relaxed and the corners of her mouth were slightly curved. Her dream must be very sweet, and he must be there. Yu Pinyin narrowed his eyes and carefully wrapped his sister in his robe and held her in his arms. Lulu washed the porridge bowl and saw that Zhang Ming and Lin Jia were taking a nap. Ku Hai, Ku Hui, and other masters were meditating with their eyes closed. Lulu lifted his monk robe and knelt at Master Ho's feet. He whispered, "Master Ho, when Miss came here she had 2 dreams. Marquis Yongla and the Crown Prince Mansion were raided." After describing the dream in detail, she anxiously asked, "Master Ho, when we came here, the Han army had retreated to Chabu City and was surrounded by the Western Yi people. I'm afraid we can't enter. Where should we go now? What should we do about the old lady in the capital?" Yu Pinyin was silent. Even if Lulu did not say it, he knew that Marquis Yongla would definitely be implicated by him. Since that person dared to betray his country, his goal must be not small. Getting rid of him was just a prelude. The real target was the Crown Prince. Who would benefit the most if the Crown Prince fell? The remaining princes were all suspects. He was now a general of a defeated army, and there was a stigma on his head. He could not easily return to the capital. The army he led was now retreating to Chabu City. The city was surrounded by the Western Yi army, and there were spies hidden inside. He could not return. Therefore, he could only mobilize the troops stationed near Chabu City to launch a surprise attack on the Western Yi army. Not only did he have to take back the 2 lost cities, but he also had to completely drive the Western Yi people out of the Wu River. He wanted to fight, and he wanted to fight to the end. As for the besieged Chabu City, he was not worried at all. If this defeat was really the work of a prince, he must have reached a consensus with the second prince of the Western Yi. The Western imperial court was currently in internal strife, and several princes were fighting for the throne. Killing him and taking away 2 cities was a strong political capital for the second prince. In order to rush back to fight for the throne, he would not stay at the border for too long. Besieging Chaba City was just an act. In a few months the 2 sides would negotiate for peace. Therefore, he had to rush to the nearest station as soon as possible to mobilize the army to fight back. Moreover, the commander of the station must be someone he trusted. Yupinian thought for a moment, and then waved his hand to Lulu. "Don't worry, I will deal with it." Lulu nodded but hesitated. "Is there something else?" Yupinian raised his eyebrows. "Reporting to Master Ho after you left, the second miss reported to the old lady that you and the miss had an affair. The old lady secretly betrothed the second miss to the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, the Lord Sun's eldest son, Sun Mingjie. Sun Mingjie was a beast dressed in human clothing, and he took pleasure in torturing women. When the Lord Shen heard about this, he came to the door and took the miss away. Now, the miss is already the miss of the family Shen." Seeing Master Ho's gloomy face, cold eyes and a strong murderous aura lingering around him, Lulu's voice became softer and softer until it disappeared. Chapter 123. After his sister fell asleep, Yupinian gently placed her on the thick hay. Then he tightened his robe to make sure that she would not catch a cold. Then, he lifted his monk robe and sat beside Zhongmeng and Lin Jia. Kuhai and the others were still meditating, motionless like statues. "You should know that someone in the army has defected to the enemy. Now that our army has retreated to Chaba City, and is surrounded by the Western people, we are trapped both internally and externally. Moreover, I'm afraid that the blame for this defeat will be pushed to us, and we might even have to take the blame for those who really defected to the enemy," he whispered. "Su Mao, the vanguard general leading the left wing, must have defected to the enemy. As for whether there are others, it is uncertain now. Since someone has defected to the enemy, I'm afraid that the internal and external difficulties are also an act. The second prince of Westerny is anxious to go back to fight for the throne, and will soon withdraw his troops to negotiate for peace. General, if we want to clear the injustice, we must destroy the Westerny army and take back the 2 lost cities." Lin Jie analyzed seriously. "But there are only 3 of us left in the army. How can we fight against the Westerny army?" Zhongming was dejected. "Go to the Star Luo path and dispatch Fang Da's 50,000 troops. We will launch a surprise attack on the Westerny people, and directly kill Shigambala." Yupinian's eyes flashed with a strong killing intent. Fang Da was his former subordinate and was saved by him several times. He could be considered loyal. 50,000 men and horses against 200,000 troops was indeed a little small, but if it was a surprise attack, as long as they fiercely attacked the middle army led by the second prince Shigambala and directly took his head, the Westerny army would certainly be in chaos. Although there were traitors hiding in the Han army, most of the generals were still loyal to him, and would definitely open the city gates to help. With cooperation from the inside and outside, they would definitely win this battle. Zhongmeng and Lin Jia looked at each other with joy on their faces. However, they soon became depressed and advised in unison, "General, dispatching the border garrison without permission is a capital offense. Even if you win, you will be impeached by the imperial censor when you return to the court." Yupinian took out a token made of dark iron from his inner pocket and flashed it in front of them. "The World Army Marshal's Tiger token?" Zhongmeng and Lin Jia were shocked. The so-called Grand Marshal of the world's armed forces was the marshal who could lead the entire Great Han Dynasty's armed forces. There was no doubt that only the previous emperors would be able to take on this role. This tiger tally should have been in the hands of Emperor Cheng Kong, but now it was split into 2 and given to Yupinian. With this half-tiger tally, he could dispatch all the troops stationed in Xizang at will. "Commander-in-Chief, His Majesty really trusts you." Lin Jie let out a long sigh, and his heart was finally at ease. "Therefore, we cannot fail the Emperor's trust. Not only must we drive the Westerny army out of the Wu River, we must also flatten the Westerny imperial court." Yu Pinyin said resolutely. The two of them nodded vigorously. They drew a simple map on the ground and began to discuss the battle plan. This discussion lasted until the moon was high in the sky. Master Kuhai and the others were still meditating. Yu Xiang, Tao Hong, and Lulu were huddled together and sleeping very soundly. They didn't even get up for dinner. It was obvious that they were very tired. Okay, it's settled. Early tomorrow morning, let Master Kuhai take us directly from Kushui Forest to Xingluo Road. We can also avoid the pursuer sent by Su Mao to assassinate us. Yu Pinyin used a branch to mess up the map. Zhang Meng and Lin Jie nodded in agreement. Only then did the three of them rest. It was a dreamless night. The next day, Yu Pinyin was awakened by a series of coughs. He looked down and found that the delicate little thing in his arms was missing. Xiang'er! He suddenly got up and shouted anxiously. What? Yu Xiang lifted his monk robe, revealing a small face covered with black ash. Yu Pinyin's manic mood immediately turned into joy. He scratched the tip of her nose and asked, "Why are you so dirty?" "I'm making a fire to boil medicine for you. Sometimes I have to boil it with a big fire, and sometimes I have to simmer it with a small fire. Sometimes I have to add firewood and sometimes I have to remove the sparks. I can't control it well." Yu Xiang looked depressed. Yu Pinyin led her to the fire. Sure enough, there was an alms bowl engraved with scriptures on the stone stove. The herbs in the bowl had been boiled, and the thick smell of herbs wafted in the cave. "Very good," he praised with a smile. He looked around and asked, "Where are the others?" Brother Zhang and Brother Lin said that they were going to Xingluo Road. So Master Kuhai took them to explore the road first. Tao Hong and Lulu went out to pick wild fruits. When they come back, we'll eat some wild fruits and chew some dry food before we set off. Yu Xiang used a handkerchief as a cushion and carefully picked up the alms bowl. He said softly, "Come, drink the medicine first." Yu Pinyin was afraid that she would be scalded, so he quickly took the alms bowl. He blew on it and drank a mouthful. Seeing his sister staring at him, he asked, "What's wrong? Are you hungry? If you're hungry, Big Brother will cook some buckwheat porridge for you. You don't have to wait for them." "I'm not hungry." Yu Xiang waved her hand. She blinked and asked, "Big Brother, is the medicine bitter?" Yu Pinyin drank another mouthful and smiled. "It's not bitter." "How can it not be bitter? You're lying." Yu Xiang glared at her brother accusingly. Yu Pinyin had no choice but to compromise. "Yeah, it's a little bitter." "That's more like it." After getting the answer she wanted, Yu Xiang leaned over and said eagerly, "Then should I add some sugar for you? You even brought white sugar when you went out?" Yu Pinyin was surprised. He knew that the little girl loved to eat sweets, but he didn't expect her to bring sugar when she went out. She was indeed a child. "I didn't bring white sugar. This is pure natural honey that I produce myself." Yu Xiang gave him a smug look. Then she took the bowl and drank a mouthful of medicine. She leaned over and poured the medicine into her brother's mouth. At the end, she didn't forget to lick away the bitterness in his mouth with her little tongue. Yu Pinyin was only stunned for a moment before he immediately wrapped his lips around her smooth and fragrant tongue and exchanged a deep kiss. The two of them reluctantly separated and pulled out a long silver thread from their mouths. After licking the silver thread, Yu Xiang raised her eyebrows and asked, "Is it sweet?" It was so sweet that it reached the bottom of her heart. Yu Pinyin smiled but didn't answer. He pulled his sister into his arms and kissed her again. The two of them intertwined and drank the medicine one mouthful at a time. They only separated when they heard footsteps. "When we return to Beijing, we'll get married immediately." Yu Pinyin recognized Tao Hong and Lulu's footsteps. He pulled his sister back into his arms and whispered into her ear. "Lulu told you, right? Ancestor doesn't agree to us being together." The smile on Yu Xiang's face collapsed. "It's fine. I'll marry you even if she doesn't agree. She'll come around after some time." Yu Pinyin lowered his head and pecked the corner of her lips. Yu Xiang became happy again. She played with her brother's slender fingers and said, "Brother, you don't know how much I miss you. I dream of you every night." "What do you dream of me for?" Yu Pinyin's voice was hoarse. His large palm slowly moved down her back to her waist. His fingertips fiddled with her belt. I dreamed that you were kissing me. Then I woke up and found that my mouth was still sucking air. Yu Xiang raised her red lips and made a pecking motion, causing Yu Pinyin to chuckle and bite her lips. With Xiang by his side, no matter how dangerous the situation was, he would feel like he was in heaven. Therefore he couldn't die, he couldn't lose, and he couldn't lose his power. He wanted to give her the best things in the world. Yu Xiang was scalded by his affectionate and passionate gaze. Her ears turned red and she continued, I realize that I don't like walking at all. After a long time my kneecaps hurt. I like it when you hug me. You hug me wherever you go. Unfortunately, everyone knows that I can walk now. When we go back, you won't be able to hug me openly anymore. Yu Pinyin couldn't help but suggest, then I'll help you build a wheelchair. When we go back you can sit in the wheelchair. Say that your leg is injured again and you can't move. That's a good idea. I'll walk when I want to. If I don't want to, I'll let you hug me. It's so comfortable. Yu Xiang hung onto her brother's neck and acted spoiled. When Tao Hong and Lulu returned, they heard the siblings' nonsensical conversation. Their foreheads twitched. Master Ho, Miss, have some wild fruits. They opened their bags and took out a few bright red fruits. Ku Hai and the others returned not long after. After breakfast, they hurriedly set off in the direction of Xingluo Road. The news that Yu Pinyin was a spy for Shi Yi broke out in the capital. It would take a month for it to spread back to Shijiang. This month was enough for him to contact Feng De to launch a surprise attack on Shi Yi's army. When he turned defeat into victory, even if the accusation of colluding with foreign enemies was spread to Shijiang, no one would believe it. When Yu Pinyin and the others successfully arrived at Xingluo Road, Old Madam and the others were locked up in the prison. The servants and masters were locked up separately. Therefore Old Madam, Yu Siyu and Yu Miaoqi lived in the same cell. Mama Ma and dozens of other people were squeezed on the opposite side. Yu Siyu's marriage was disrupted again. However, her husband didn't break off the engagement. Instead, he came to visit her every day and said some encouraging words. On this day, Old Madam sent off her grandson-in-law. She clung to the door of the prison and anxiously waited. Yu Miaoqi sarcastically said, "Don't look. She is now the Lord Shun's younger sister. She is also the Minister of Agriculture personally conferred by His Majesty. You don't know how comfortable her life is. How could she come to the side of a prisoner like you? Younger sister Xianger isn't an ungrateful wretch like you. If she knew that something happened to the Marquis household, she would definitely come." Yu Siyu retorted. "She won't come. The Lord Shun won't let her wade into our muddy waters. Moreover, I was the one who personally drove her out. She must still blame me." Old Madam slumped to the ground. Yu Siyu hurriedly hugged her and patted her to comfort her. Seeing that Yu Miaoqi was still sneering, she couldn't help but become angry. She untied her belt and quickly walked over. In the blink of an eye, she strangled her neck and sternly questioned, "Speak, were you the one who put the evidence in Big Brother's study?" The Marquis household was heavily guarded, especially around the study. The patrolling imperial bodyguards came and went without stopping. Unless something happened to Jingfu Courtyard, they wouldn't leave their posts without permission. It just so happened that Shin Yuanqi came to acknowledge his family. Yu Xiang and Old Madam pulled in the courtyard and made a big fuss. It attracted many imperial bodyguards to mediate. Yu Miaoqi's figure could be seen everywhere in these accidents. Ordinary people wouldn't destroy their own family for selfish desires. However, if it was Yu Miaoqi, it was simply a certainty. She had never seen herself as a member of the family Yu for a moment. She could abandon anyone for her own future. Chapter 124. Yu Siyu had trained in the countryside for more than half a year, so the strength of her hands was incomparable to that of an ordinary maiden. She squeezed Yu Miaoqi's neck until it cracked. If this continued for a few more breaths, Yu Miaoqi's life would have been taken away. Yu Miaoqi's face turned purple. Because she was desperately trying to breathe, blue veins popped out on her forehead. She looked both ferocious and battered. She felt like her head was slowly emptying, and her chest was rapidly expanding. It was as if her ribs would burst open in the next second. She was about to die. She could only helplessly scratch the ground. Her broken fingernails mixed with blood fell into the straw pile. "What are you doing?" "Murder. There's murder here." A cry of alarm caused Yusiu to loosen her grip. Yu Miaoqi's throat was strained as she hurriedly pulled on her belt to breathe. "Mother, save me. They want to kill me." She turned her head to look at the terrified Lin clan outside the prison. Lin clan rushed over and loudly berated Yusiu, then immediately begged her to be merciful. The matriarch closed her eyes and remained unmoved. When she heard the footsteps of the officials running over, she slowly opened her mouth. "Let her go. No matter who ordered her, without Marquis Yongle, she has no value. Sooner or later, she will be abandoned like a pair of worn-out shoes and die a horrible death. I'll wait and see what happens to her." Yusiu finally gave up and quickly fastened her belt. Yu Miaoqi hurriedly covered her neck and crawled to Lin clan's side. She tightly hugged her thin arms. Marquis Yongle's women were all like wolves and tigers. If they were angered, they would even dare to kill people. No wonder they could raise a living king of hell like Yu Pinyin. Shen Yuanqi also arrived with the officials. He was wearing an official's robe, but he had already taken off his official's hat and held it in his hands. He looked very tired. In the imperial court, the official's hat must not be taken off at will. Shen Yuanqi's action could only mean two things. First, he had been demoted. Second, he intended to retire and return to his hometown. Shen Yuanqi was only in his early 20s. In any case, it was impossible for him to retire and return to his hometown. Then there was only one possibility. He had been implicated by Marquis Yongle. The old lady was overcome with grief. She walked quickly to the cell door and asked anxiously, "Lord Shen, what are you doing?" "Old madam, you don't have to blame yourself. Shen is only temporarily suspended from his post and has not been stripped of his scholarly titles. Shen has already asked His Majesty for an imperial decree. I will let you out now, please." Shen Yuanqi waved his hand at the Yamen runner. The Yamen runner immediately opened the prison door and respectfully invited old madam out. As the saying goes, a centipede dies but never falls down. Although the Marquis household was in a precarious situation, the emperor still remembered their old friendship. Because of this, no one dared to rashly touch the matriarch and the others. Now that the crown prince had been imprisoned, it caused a huge commotion inside and outside the court. In this morning's court meeting, many officials came out to plead for leniency on behalf of the crown prince. The generals also expressed Commandant Yu's loyalty one after another. However, with irrefutable evidence, Emperor Chongkong did not listen to them at all. Everyone who pleaded for leniency was fiercely reprimanded by him. Several officials who were on good terms with the crown prince and Yu Pinyin were suspended from their posts and investigated. Shen Yuanqi was one of them. The old lady felt ashamed and looked hopefully behind him. Shen Yuanqi faintly glanced at Yu Miaoqi, who was huddling together with the Lin clan. In a warm voice he said, "Old madam, leave with Shen first. Other matters can be discussed after you have settled down. This place is unlucky. It's not advisable to stay here for long." The old lady nodded and slowly walked out with Yusiu's support. She did not expect that in such a time of crisis, Shen Yuanqi would come to help. It could be seen that the family Shen was a righteous and affectionate person. She really made a big mistake. She should not have obstructed Xiang'er for the sake of so-called morality and honor. As long as everyone was well, safe and happy together, it was more important than anything else. Thinking of her granddaughter who had already separated from her, and thinking of her grandson whose life was unknown, the old lady cried bitterly after boarding the carriage. Yu Miaoqi naturally did not dare to touch the old lady's side. She followed the Lin clan and boarded another carriage. Shen Yuanqi was suspended from his post and investigated? Good, it was killing two birds with one stone. She lowered her eyes and secretly smiled. When she passed by the sealed Marquis Yongle, she lifted the curtain and looked for a long time. The two returned to the Lin residence. They broke the brazier and swept it with grapefruit leaves before sitting down to talk. "Tell me honestly, did that person ask you to put the evidence of your crimes? Do you know what you are doing? Your surname is Yu. If Prefecture Yu falls, you will be the descendant of a criminal official. Not to mention the princes and descendants, even ordinary people will not marry you. How can you frame your brother? No matter what, he is still your brother. This was the first time the Lin clan had spoken so harshly to their daughter. Yu Miaoqi refused to admit it. She only said that she asked that person to find Sun Mingjie to marry Yu Xiang. She did not know anything else. The Lin clan repeatedly questioned her several times. Seeing her firm expression and full of grievance, they believed her. Only then did they restore their gentle appearance and let her go back to her room to sleep. As a mother, who would be willing to think the worst of their children? Yu Miaoqi bowed and left. After returning to her room, she lay on the bed and smiled coldly. So what if she was the descendant of a criminal official? She did not tell the Lin clan that when Yu pushed her into the water and tried to drown her. She saw many wonderful scenes. She saw that she had become the wife of the fourth imperial prince. The fourth imperial prince was deeply in love with her and doted on her. She also saw that she had paid a spy to assassinate Yu Pinyin on the battlefield, and then put the crime of colluding with foreign enemies on him to bring down the crown prince. In the end, the fourth imperial prince ascended the throne, and she became the empress. Using the great power in her hands, she turned around and rehabilitated the prefecture Yu. She used the crime of framing to bring down the fifth imperial prince who had been Xian Qinhuang at that time. The fifth imperial prince was sentenced to be beheaded at the Meridian Gate. Marquis Yongla's injustice was cleared. The dead Yu Pinyin was posthumously given the title of Duke of Yu. Marquis Yongla went one step further. But because Yu Pinyin had not married and had no children, she chose a young child from the cadet branch to be raised by the old Tai Tai to inherit the title and continue the glory of the prefecture Yu. In those scenes, the enormous Marquis Yongla was played in the palm of her hand. She destroyed him when she said she would, and he would rise when she said she would. It was just a light touch of her lips. Everyone, including the old Tai Tai, worshipped her like a god and did not dare to be disrespectful. She could make clouds and rain with a flip of her hand. This was the taste of power. It was so real and so close. She almost instantly believed that this was her fate in the future. The gaze that the fourth imperial prince looked at her with was so warm and affectionate. It was the same gaze that Yu Pinyin had when he looked at Yu Xiang. So even though she was the daughter of a criminal official, she was not in a hurry. She believed that the fourth imperial prince would not abandon her. Just as her thoughts were running wild, the head of the Lin clan came in with a brocade box and said in a low voice, "That person just sent someone to deliver this. He also gave you a message for you to endure for now. He will think of a way to get you a new identity." The Lin clan had always thought that the other party became friends with their daughter because of the power in Yu Pinyin's hands. Now that he did not abandon her, she was completely relieved. Yu Miaoqi held the brocade box and smiled sweetly. Shen Yuanqi settled the old Tai Tai and the others in a village in the suburbs. Everything was arranged properly. Even the servants of the prefecture Yu were accommodated. His sister had already gone to Shijiang. When she came back, she could only marry Yu Pinyin. There was no other way out. For his sister to live comfortably in her husband's family in the future, he could only try his best to please the old Tai Tai. The old Tai Tai used grapefruit leaves to sweep the hem of her clothes. Before she sat down, she asked anxiously, "Where is Xiang'er? Why didn't she come? Is she still blaming me?" His sister was willing to give up her life for Yu Pinyin. Shen Yuanqi naturally would not hide it from her. He should let the old Tai Tai see what kind of affectionate and righteous granddaughter-in-law she found. Thinking like this, Shen Yuanqi bluntly said, "Xiang'er dreamed one night that Master Ho was hit by a stray arrow and fell into Wu River. She left without saying goodbye and ran to Shijiang to look for someone. Right now I don't know where she is. I haven't heard from her for almost 2 months." In fact, that was not the case. Yu Pinyin had already sent a messenger pigeon to report that he was safe. He said this only to let the old Tai Tai realize the preciousness of his sister. The old Tai Tai was greatly moved when she heard this. The tears that she had just wiped away began to fall down again. She repeatedly called her precious granddaughter's name. She beat her chest and scolded herself. She said that she was ridiculously wrong. Shen Yuanqi saw that she was so emotional. He had to comfort her with good words and hurriedly ordered people to boil ginseng tea. After drinking the ginseng tea, the old Tai wiped away her tears and said word by word, "Lord Shun, this old one was narrow-minded. They love each other, so they should be together. What can other people say about them? If they can come back safely, this old one will definitely hold a grand and lively wedding for them. The dowry and betrothal gifts will all be provided by this old one. Xiang'er is a good child. There is no better child than her." After she finished speaking, she sobbed again. Yu hurriedly wiped her tears. As he wiped, he also began to cry. Shen Yuanqi originally wanted to spread the news that the two were safe, but he was afraid that there were too many people here, and it would ruin the emperor's plan. He could only force himself to restrain himself. In Shijiang, Yu Pinyin dispatched Feng Da's army of 50,000 and rushed to Chaba City from Xingluo Road overnight. The 50,000 soldiers and horses formed a line and rode side by side. Behind them was a cloud of dust. The soldiers raised their shining swords and rushed forward with loud roars. The momentum was so great that it seemed like there was a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses attacking. It also seemed like a surging tide that wanted to swallow people. The second prince of Xi besieging Chaba City was just a show. Every day, he only sent a group of cavalry to shout and curse at the city gate. The rest of the people stayed in the camp to drink wine and play with military prostitutes. Therefore, when Yu Pinyin attacked, he didn't even wear pants. He only wore a battle robe and his two hairy legs were bare as he hurriedly climbed onto the horse's back. Seeing the cloud of dust in the sky, he was scared. Then he saw the vast army quickly gathered together and rushed straight to the center of the army. He turned his horse around and wanted to escape. The commander was in chaos, and the soldiers were even more panicked. Without needing the Han army to make a move, they were trampled to death by their own people. When the generals in the city saw this, they quickly opened the city gate and rushed to help. With cooperation from the inside and outside, they killed the 200,000 soldiers. Then they continued to chase after the second prince to Ulanchabu and Fengxing City. They actually wanted to take back the two cities in one go. Chapter 125. Yu Pinyin was already famous for his fighting prowess. His reputation as the living king of hell was equivalent to tens of thousands of troops. He came back from the dead, and no one knew where he got 50,000 troops from. In the eyes of the Western people, he was no less than a heavenly soldier. Psychologically, they were scared, and their legs went soft on the battlefield. In just one day and one night, the Western army was defeated again and again. Not only did they lose Ulanchabu and Fengxing City, they were also driven to the shore of the Wu River by Yu Pinyin. With nowhere to go, they had no choice but to wade across the river. The Western second prince's legs were bare, and the target was too obvious. He was shot in the back by Yu Pinyin and fell from the horse. Several soldiers tied him up and dragged him back to the barracks. The situation of the war was completely reversed, but the Han army also suffered heavy losses. Feng Da's 50,000 troops did not have any casualties, but Yu Pinyin's own elite troops lost more than half. There were only 3 people left in the middle army, and the right wing was ambushed, leaving only tens of thousands of people. Only the left wing led by Su Mao only suffered a few hundred casualties, which was a miracle. Looking at the battle report in his hand, Yu Pinyin sneered, and then ordered people to bring his sister, Master Kuhai, and others to Ulanchabu. At present, the Western imperial court was already in chaos, and several princes led their respective tribes to fight. He was waiting for the Western army to suffer heavy losses, and then he would give a fatal blow. But in order to numb the Western people, he sent a letter to the Western emperor, asking them to take land, cattle, horses, and gold to redeem the second prince, giving them the illusion that he wanted to seek peace. After taking care of everything, he walked to the dungeon, took a whip dipped in salt water from the soldier's hand, and ruthlessly whipped the second prince. Mournful screams echoed in the cramped space. The second prince was only 19 years old, and it was his first time on the battlefield. How could he withstand such torture? He betrayed Su Mao and the others in no time. However, he had no idea which prince was behind Su Mao. There were also several other generals in the interrogation. When they heard this, they turned to look at Su Mao and his trusted aides. Su Mao took the initiative and asked, regardless of whether this barbarian's words can be believed or not, there is no conclusive evidence. I want to ask the commander why he privately dispatched the border garrison? This is a crime punishable by death. Zhang Meng and Lin Jie did not care about his struggles and directly tied him to the torture rack. The red-hot soldering iron was pressed deeply into his chest, and then the word rebel was branded on his cheek. I refuse to accept this. You have no evidence and you are abusing the law. I don't accept this. He shouted at the top of his lungs. One after another, his trusted aides stood up and shouted that they were not convinced. They also said that if they were to be judged guilty, the commander-in-chief privately mobilizing the troops was a crime worthy of 10,000 deaths. As such, the left wing had become Su Mao's private army. Tie them all up. It's better to kill the wrong person than to let them go. Yu Pinyin waved his sleeves and the soldiers rushed forward to tie them up. As long as the left-wing general was eliminated, the soldiers under his command would still have to listen to the commander's orders. The dungeon was silent. The remaining generals wanted to say something but hesitated. They looked at Feng De frequently. Although the two of them had won the battle, they would still be sentenced to death when they returned to the capital for the crime of privately mobilizing troops. They were loyal to the commander but even more loyal to Emperor Cheng Kong. They were thinking about how to deal with this. Yu Pinyin looked at the crowd indifferently. Seeing that there were no sneaky people left, he took out the dark iron token from his inner pocket. Everyone was shocked. Even Su Mao stopped cursing and looked dazed. They never thought that the emperor would trust the commander to this extent. Use torture. We must find out the mastermind behind this. Yu Pinyin waved his hand and walked out of the dungeon slowly. In order to prevent spies from hiding in Ulanchabu, Yu Xiang and his two servants still disguised themselves as secular disciples and mixed in with a group of monks. Ku Hui went to the barracks to treat the wounded as soon as he arrived. In order to reduce the pain caused by the friction of cloth, most of the wounded took off their battle robes and exposed their breasts. Some were injured on their legs and did not even wear pants. Therefore, when Yu Xiang proposed to take care of the wounded, he was glared at by Yu Pinyin. He had no choice but to go back to his room with Tao Hong and Lulu to rest. Although Yu Pinyin had special treatment as the commander, the courtyard he lived in was not big. There were a total of 5 rooms. 2 of them were filled with sundries. A soldier was in charge of washing clothes and cooking. You can go back. I'll take care of things here, Yu Xiang said to the soldier in a rough voice. Because the commander had ordered him to listen to this person's orders, the soldier obediently left. Yu Xiang immediately changed to a crisp voice. Quickly start the fire. I'll cook for Gij. Tao Hong squatted in front of the stove to start the fire. Lulu looked through the basket and asked worriedly, Miss, you've never cooked before. Can you do it? You'll know once you try. Yu Xiang picked up the kitchen knife and gestured at the pork on the chopping board. Yu Xiang's eyes flashed. She stood up and moved the Kong bed table to a nearby table. What do you mean? Yu Pinyin stopped laughing and said in a hoarse voice. Yu Xiang didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Tao Hong and Lulu who were standing at the door. Lulu quivered. She hurriedly closed the door and pulled Tao Hong away. Yu Xiang walked over step by step. As she walked, she took off her monk's robe and untied the cloth binding her chest. 2 white and round balls jumped out of the bindings and playfully trembled. Yu Pinyin's eyes didn't have a trace of light. His breathing gradually turned from calm to rapid. The huge thing in his lower abdomen couldn't be hidden even through the loose clothes. He pulled the naked little demon into his arms and forcefully pinched her slender waist. He bit her earlobe and asked in a deep voice, Xiang'er, do you know what you're doing? The battlefield is constantly changing. If you give it to me and I die on the battlefield, how will you live in the future? Of course, Yu Xiang had considered this problem before. When she stepped out of the capital, She was already prepared to face death. She was a stubborn person. Once she fell in love, she would disregard everything else. Morality, ethics, etiquette, justice, and honor were all not within her scope of consideration. She wanted to come, so she came. It was that simple. Before I came, I was thinking. She raised her small face and gently blew into her brother's ear. Her sweet and soft voice was filled with righteousness. I must find you. If you're alive, I want to see you. If you're dead, I want to see your corpse. If I find your corpse, I'll pierce it into your heart and continue accompanying you in the yellow springs. She took out the golden hairpin in her hair and pressed it against her heart. She continued, if I can't find your corpse, I'll keep searching until I die of exhaustion. Seeing that her brother's eyes were red and revealing a rare fragile state, she leaned over and kissed the corner of his eyes. She softly said, fortunately, the heavens favored us and allowed us to meet peacefully. We're on the battlefield. Every day counts. What's the point of thinking so much? If you die in battle, wait for me on the bridge of helplessness for 2 months. If I'm pregnant with your child, I'll raise it. If I'm not pregnant, I'll immediately go down to accompany you. You're not the only one who wants to eat me. I also want to eat you. If you don't believe me, you can touch me. She held her brother's large hand and moved it downwards. It was wet and slippery. This was the most moving words of love in the world. Every word of her confession was like a sledgehammer, violently shaking the defenses of his heart. Eupinion fell into ecstasy and was unable to restrain himself. He snatched the golden hairpin from her hand and threw it far away. Then, he pressed her down on the couch and tore the thin monk robe into pieces. Chapter 126. The second prince of Western Yi was born after the Yuan dynasty, and was deeply doted on by the emperor and empress. In addition, he defeated the Han army when he first entered the battlefield. He won 2 cities in a row and even killed Eupinion, who was known as the invincible god of war. As long as he returned alive, the throne would be his. Therefore the first prince, the third prince, and the fourth prince were anxious. One after another, they sent troops to force the emperor to abdicate. By the time the news of Eupinion capturing the second prince came, it was already too late. The several princes had already formed a blood feud that was difficult to reverse. The various tribes of Western Yi were also torn apart. As the saying goes, take advantage of your illness to take your life. Eupinion timely sent troops to the west, directly flattened the Western Yi imperial court, and took the heads of the empress, the third and fourth princes. The first prince led the remaining troops to the more desolate desert. If he wanted to restore his former glory, he would need to recuperate for several decades. Eupinion cleaned up the battlefield and rewarded the officers and soldiers. Only then did he write a letter to Emperor Chong Kong to report his victory. Emperor Chong Kong received a secret report from the Dragonscale Guard. He was overjoyed and ordered him to immediately return to the capital. However, he did not announce this good news to the outside world. He only sent someone to inform the imprisoned crown prince. The current imperial court of the Great Han Dynasty was also in chaos. The crown prince's officials were impeached and attacked every day. The days were very difficult. The fifth prince and the sixth prince, who had always been mediocre, suddenly became active. They won over a large number of officials to speak for the new crown prince. On one hand, they tried to curry favor with their imperial father. On the other hand, they attacked each other. Emperor Chong Kong coldly watched and shook his head at the performance of the two princes. The person who could slowly infiltrate the Dragonscale Guard and defeat the crown prince and Eupinion in one fell swoop should not be so impetuous. The mastermind behind the scenes was not the two princes. On the contrary, the fourth prince had remained silent from beginning to end. He did not win over the officials, nor did he deliberately curry favor with him. Instead, he did his best to plead for mercy for the crown prince and Eupinion. He did not forget to visit the crown prince every day, causing the officials who supported the crown prince to turn to him, because only when the fourth prince, who was related to the crown prince, ascended to the throne would they have a chance to survive. His performance could be said to be perfect, but the more perfect it was, the more suspicious it was. To be able to rope in nearly half of the officials in the imperial court without making a sound and without causing the fifth prince and the sixth prince to feel apprehensive. His methods were truly shrewd and ruthless. Emperor Chong Kang's vigilance towards his son had been raised to the extreme. If it wasn't for the crown prince's foresight, and if it wasn't for Yu Pinyan's luck, he would have fallen into this elaborate trap. First, he would have abandoned the crown prince. When he came back to his senses, he would have abandoned the fifth prince and the sixth prince. Then, he would have naturally passed the throne to this filial son. Emperor Chong Kang's methods were shrewd and ruthless, and his eyes were sharp. How could the young fourth prince compare to him? He didn't need any evidence. Just based on intuition and conjecture, he had already determined the real culprit. He also sent secret troops to closely monitor the fourth prince. He didn't care about the disputes in the imperial court. He only wanted to coldly distinguish who was loyal and who was treacherous among the officials. When Yu Pinyan returned to the imperial court, he would use those who needed to be used, and clean up those who needed to be cleaned up. He would hand over a clean imperial court to the crown prince. His life's work could be considered complete. When Yu Pinyan received the secret edict, he immediately summoned all the generals to discuss the matter of returning to the capital. Su Mao refused to confess. Even when Yu Pinyan personally interrogated him, he clenched his teeth and didn't say a word. He even bit his tongue several times to commit suicide. Fortunately, someone discovered him in time and removed his lower jaw, saving his life. Yu Pinyan had no choice but to lock him in a cage and bring him back to the capital for Emperor Chong Kong to make a decision. After confirming the time to break camp and return to the capital with the generals, he walked towards the small courtyard bathed in the afterglow of the setting sun. The courtyard was filled with the aroma of food. Tao Hong and Lulu placed the bowls and plates on the Kong table. Yu Xiang walked out of the kitchen with an apron tied around her waist, and a bit of black dust stuck to the tip of her nose. Seeing her brother, her eyes lit up. She greeted him with a smile. "You came back at the right time. I was just about to ask Tao Hong to call you for lunch. At noon, Master Kuhai and Master Kuhui came to say goodbye to you. They said they were going to Guyu country to cultivate. Since you weren't here, I had people prepare a lot of dry rations and monk robes. I also sent a group of soldiers to send them to the border." Yu Pinyan skillfully hugged her slender waist and used his finger to rub the tip of her nose. He smiled and said, "Then I've been rude. When we return to the capital, help me go to the Zhangguo temple and add more incense to it." "Okay, I'll do it." Yu Xiang nodded. She pulled her brother to the Kong table and sat down. She wrapped the thinly sliced roast duck, cucumber, shredded onions, peanut butter, and other ingredients into a large pancake and rolled it up. Yu Pinyan looked at the large pancake that was about to be fed to his lips. His expression was slightly hesitant. "What's wrong?" Yu Xiang blinked her eyes in confusion. Yu Pinyan took a bite and said softly, "Xianger, it seems like we've been eating large pancakes for more than 2 months. Shouldn't we change to something else?" "I've changed." Yu Xiang tapped her bowl with her chopsticks and said, "The day before yesterday we ate beef rolls. Yesterday we ate chicken rolls. Today we ate duck rolls. Every day we make different things. How can we change?" "I'm asking if we can change it to something like rice or stir-fry," Yu Pinyan suggested. Yu Xiang was silent. She stole a few glances at him before she reluctantly said, "I want to change, but I only know how to make pancakes. I don't know how to cook other dishes. I can't cook meat properly and I always burn vegetables. Sometimes I cook rice into thin porridge and sometimes I cook rice crust. It's not presentable at all. I'm still learning. I used to be such a delicate porcelain doll. Because of you, I'm even getting calluses on my fingers. What are you still dissatisfied with?" As she spoke, she felt wronged. She spread her white and tender hands on the table. Yu Pinyan took her hands and looked. Sure enough, there were some places where her skin was scraped. His heart instantly ached. He pulled her onto his lap and kissed and coaxed her. "My little sweetheart, don't do these things anymore. Let Tao Hong and Lulu take care of you. A porcelain doll like you should be held in my arms and pampered every day." As he spoke, he kissed all 10 of her fingers. His actions were indescribably gentle. "But I like to wash my hands and make soup for you. Isn't this the duty of a wife? Yu Xiang was no longer wronged. She snuggled into her brother's arms. Whatever you like. I'll eat whatever you make. I'll eat pancakes you make for the rest of my life. Yu Pinyin smiled happily. He never knew that he could say such mushy words of love. However, when it came to his sister, making her happy seemed to be a kind of duty and instinct. Yu Xiang glared at him and snorted. She was clearly very happy, but she had to put on a front. Yu Pinyin loved her little appearance to death. His large hand reached under her clothes and stroked the soft flesh of her waist. He kneaded her into a puddle of spring water and melted her into his arms. The two of them kicked the Kong table away and hugged each other. When they were done, Yu Xiang was already as soft as mud. She could only rest her head on her jade arm and gasp for breath. Yu Pinyin twisted the handkerchief to help her tidy up, but her naughty little foot kicked the soft part of his body. He immediately felt it again. Little devil, you still want me to tidy you up? He gritted his teeth and whispered. We have to leave tomorrow. The journey is inconvenient. I need to eat more. Yu Xiang licked her dark red lips. Her charming eyes hooked towards her brother. She had always been carefree. She lived as she pleased and didn't care about feudal etiquette at all. She had just experienced the joy of the pleasure of fish and water. Naturally, she didn't feel satisfied no matter how much she enjoyed it. What Yu Pinyin loved the most was her fiery passion. She was frank and straightforward. He chuckled and pressed down on her. The two of them were still on their way back to the capital when there was a new disturbance in the court. Because the Prime Minister was the backbone of the Crown Prince's support, if the other princes wanted to ascend the throne, they naturally had to remove this block. Under the incitement of the princes, memorials to impeach the Prime Minister flew like snowflakes to Emperor Chong Kang's desk. Among them, there was one that caught the attention of Emperor Chong Kong. It was to reverse the verdict of Yu Junwei, who had been exiled to Shu. Yu Junwei was Yu Pinyin's third uncle. He was the son of a concubine of the matriarch. In the past, he had been the Minister of Appointments. Later, the Prime Minister impeached him for selling his position and accepting bribes. After his crimes were verified, his entire family was exiled. The witness from that year unexpectedly retracted his testimony, saying that everything was fabricated by Yu Pinyin and the Crown Prince in order to seize the title of nobility. Because his entire family's lives were in the hands of Yu Pinyin, he had no choice but to go against his conscience and frame a loyal subject. Now that Yu Pinyin was dead, the threat to his family had been removed. Only then did he stand up to atone for his past crimes. When this matter spread, it caused an uproar in the imperial court. Many people impeached the Prime Minister and Marquis Yongle. Even Marquis Yongle's birth mother, the Lin clan, stood up to testify for Yu Pinyin's family. They described in detail how Yu Pinyin had fabricated all sorts of crimes to frame his uncle. When the matriarch heard the news, she was so angry that she vomited blood. Yu Siyu wanted nothing more than to burn down the Lin residence. Fortunately, she was pulled back by Mama Ma. In the Crown Prince mansion, Emperor Chongkong and the Crown Prince were playing chess. Emperor Chongkong placed down a chess piece and sighed. Yifeng really has poor affinity with his parents. He was actually framed by his own birth mother to this extent. What exactly is the Lin clan thinking? I don't know. They've probably gone crazy. The Crown Prince rubbed his temples in distress. Emperor Chongkong lowered his head and drank tea. He said, Old Fourth is coming more and more frequently. The Crown Prince sneered, that's right. His words are full of encouragement and consolation. I'm very moved. I've advised him many times to fight for that position, but he refused to comment. Emperor Chongkong also laughed. He ate a chess piece and said in a fleeting tone, He's waiting for you to surrender. What's the point of your mouth moving up and down? It was time to give him something substantial. If you don't use your connections now, they'll be useless in the future. If Old Fifth and Old Sixth take the throne, you'll definitely die. That's why I can only rely on Fourth Brother now. Only when Fourth Brother takes the throne can I live. Don't you think so, Father? The Crown Prince's tone was light. Emperor Chongkong nodded, his eyes full of murderous intent. The memorial to overturn Yu Junwei's case was quickly approved by Emperor Chong Kong. Not only did he imprison the prime minister on the same day, he also sent people to Shu to bring Yu Junwei's family back to the capital. This matter quickly spread to everyone. They all said that Family Yu's third branch's suffering was finally over. If things went smoothly, not only would Yu Junwei be reinstated, he might even inherit the title of Marquis Yongla. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.